Yes, all, and welcome to the Tuesday morning meeting of the Board of County Commissioners. This is a regular meeting. Just a reminder that we do have a meeting that begins at 1:30 today, the afternoon meeting. So beginning with today's agenda, Mr. Mokrahisi, do we have any adjustments to today's agenda?
No.
See none. Any from the board? See none. Then Mr. Mokrahisi, any emergency business today?
No, we don't have any.
Okay. All righty. Then I'm going to say this before we get into public comments. If you take a look behind you, everybody do this right now. You look through the window, you see Lane County Farmers Market. It operates on Tuesdays currently, soon to be a year-round farmers market, operating more often than just on Tuesdays. We're all very excited about that. If you have a chance to visit there today, please do it.
Chair, I look behind me and I just saw a duck.
Who put that there?
I'm sorry.
And for those of you who can't see, there's a duck stuck into the fur planking up here. All righty, then let's move along with public comment. The comments will be taken in the order that they signed up. People who are present in Harris Hall will be called on first. Subsequently, Ms. Jones will handle the queue for anybody who has called in for public comment. You'll have 3 minutes to speak. There'll be no warning as you approach the 3-minute timeline. The timeline there will be a clock on the wall signaling how much time you have remaining. I'll call the first speaker followed by the next speaker, and please step to the mic, identify yourself, and begin your 3 minutes. Any written comment should be turned that you wish to go into today's public comment would need to have been submitted yesterday. If you want for next Tuesday, submit it anytime before Monday next week to Ms. Jones. So we'll begin today's public comment with the Hung Tran, followed by Arlen Rexius.
Thank you, Commissioner. My name is Hung Tran. I'm here to speak about the homeless situation. I know there's funding that on the agenda, but I just have a quick proposed solution if you want to consider. So this is one of the places we have a great amount of homeless because of the high rising rent. And then not only people had to pay rent, but they had to pay for space rents and a lot of business park. So I'm proposing that if the county willing to allocate vacant lands, using the black grants that we have available from a federal funding and turn them into lots. And either through the county owned or through the partnership with business partner, then we can provide those lots for people to move in that will immediately create the tax incremental district for the county and lowering the rent for the people was basically lower the homeless population. And when people have more money in their pockets, it will go to the local community. At this point of time, all the business part owned by a couple of companies from California. So all the fundings are going out of our community. And it's tremendously, we leaking the amount of money into our community. So by creating these lots, all you had the county only responsible for putting in the sewer system, the water system, but however, you can get the tax base out of it for years to come and lower the pressure and allow the county to go. This is not the wacky idea. This is the thing that has been done across community for many, many years, successfully been doing it for community to go. I just wonder if you guys would consider that. So, so that's all I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hung Tran. Arlen Rexius, followed by Nikos Ridge.
Hello, I'm Arlen Rexius, president of Rexius Forest Byproducts. I'm the third generation owner of a company that started here in 1935. As one of the largest employers of Eugene, we vitally care about what happens in our community. We know about large investments and we know which ones have a nice return on investment. And the Emerald Stadium is one of them. Personally, I have been attending the game since 1960, walking the mile to the game when it used to be safe for kids to walk the street at night. The games are what me and my friends did for entertainment. Now, as an adult with 11 grandkids, we attend the game all the time. My business rents sections out of the stadium, and we would rent more if we had this new stadium with a lot larger facilities. It's a vital part of what makes Eugene, Eugene. To lose this team would be devastating. The collaboration to build the new stadium is an opportunity to both keep this popular baseball team in the community and get a much needed multi-use facility for the Lane Event Center and the community that will serve the community year round. As you are aware, the timing is very important. Getting the deadline facing the M's and the current availability of funding from partners, any delay or change in the timeline jeopardizes the whole project and the ability to leverage outside funding to much needed facilities. This is a local project with regional impact. The stadium multi-use facility will be the largest publicly accessible entertainment venue between Portland and Sacramento on the On-5 corridor. The construction would create good paying jobs during constructions, and companies like mine would have the chance to bid on the sections of the project and brings jobs and revenue locally. The facility would draw an estimated 300,000 plus visitors to the facility during the spring, summer, and fall, many of them from out of town that would fill our local restaurants and the hotels as well. It is estimated that when completed, the facility would contribute over $42 million annually to Oregon's economics, along with the full year equivalent of 548 jobs. Over 10 years, the facility would generate in $66 million in state income revenue. I've personally seen how the Emeralds partner with many local nonprofit organizations and raise awareness about their important work and to raise funding to support them. I have personally teamed up with them on many of them, the Boys and Girls Club, American Cancer Society, and the Eugene Police Department, just to name a few. Please do your best to make this stadium a reality. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rexius. Next is Nikos Ridge, followed by Guadalupe Quinn.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for your time today. My name is Nikos Ridge. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Ninkasi Brewing Company, and I'm here in support of the M Stadium project. One of the reasons is because baseball and beer go so well together. And I think a couple more things that I hope you consider are what happened at the old Civic site when the team moved and how the community came together to really preserve that as a public space in their neighborhood. I think the town and the people here love the opportunity to have public spaces within the community. And additionally, from my own experience, when we expanded our business in 2014, we had looked at opportunities to move out of the neighborhood we were in and go outside of town to more industrial areas where it would have been easier to build and probably more functional for some reasons. But we took on the extra expense and complexity of staying in our neighborhood. And I think it's had great benefit both to our business and to the community that we're in. So I hope you consider these things, and I hope that we can move this project forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ridge. Next is Guadalupe Quinn, who will be followed by Dennis Herbert, A-Bear.
Buenos dias, good morning. My name is Guadalupe Quinn. When I first came to Eugene in 1978, one of the first places some friends took us to was Civic Stadium to watch the M's play. We were so excited to learn that Eugene, our new community, had its very own baseball team and a stadium that apparently had opened in 1938. How great was that? Needless to say, over the years, we have been going to Civic Stadium to watch the M's. It's become a big deal, not only for us, but an absolute must for folks who visit and family who come. Like so many of us in the community, we were heartbroken when we lost Civic Stadium in 2015 to a fire, leaving us all wondering what would happen to our M's team. Where would they go? What would they do? Although we are grateful that they did find another place to continue to play, many of us are still wondering, feel that it's time for the M's to have their own Civic Stadium to call home. I am here to ask you to please move forward quickly and approve the building of a new stadium for our Emeralds team at the Lane Event Center as it's been proposed. Let's make sure we keep this popular and so beloved team in our community, a valuable community partner that works and supports more than 200 groups in our community throughout the year, always looking for places to support and to give back. Who, by the way, throughout the season transforms itself to Las Monarcas de Eugene, complete with special uniforms, traditional Latin music, performances, and food, all as a special way to welcome the Latinx presence in our community and their contributions to Lane County, always creating an exciting atmosphere at the stadium. Let's take advantage of this rare moment to create and build a new multi-use facility for the event center and for our community to use year-round. In closing, I'd like to point out some important areas that you have already heard about, but I believe are worth mentioning. Do keep in mind that this is a local project with regional impact. This stadium multi-use facility will be the largest publicly accessible entertainment venue between Portland, Sacramento, and the I-5 corridor. The construction will create good paying jobs during construction and once it is operational. This facility will draw over 300,000 visitors to the site during spring, summer, and fall months. It will enhance public safety emergency operations and public response capabilities by serving as a mass shelter and evacuation facility for events such as wildflowers and other emergencies.
Thank you, Ms. Quinn.
Thank you.
I'd listen all day, but thank you very much. Dennis Hebert, please, followed by Michael Riley.
Good morning, commissioners. I'm Lori Trieger is my commissioner. Thank you, Lori. And thank to all of you for the positions that y'all have offered to the community to help us out. As I said, my name is Dennis Hebert. I'm one of the co-founders of Save Civic Stadium. I am currently the president of Friends of Civic Stadium, of which we're so thankful for Bev Smith and the sports and everything else that is going on the old site. It is, I would say that the embers of Civic are reveling in the wonderful sporting venue that she has created for us in our neighborhood. Now we have an opportunity to expand neighborhood sporting events and concerts and the likes of that with a new event facility at the fairgrounds. I would say that in the 20-something years I went to games at Civic Stadium, easily 500 to 1,000 people walked and rode their bicycles to those games. For the last 4 years at Civic Stadium, I was out there with my Save Civic Stadium banner, and I talked with thousands and thousands of people. They all love Civic, but one of the things they loved is to have a gathering spot in the middle of the summer to where they can meet with friends, neighbors, and the rest of the community to enjoy just a wonderful evening together. I think we have a great opportunity right now to put that back into the works in a different neighborhood, but I'm still within biking distance, so I'm thankful for that. One of the other things is that the city of Eugene keeps talking about this 20-minute walkable neighborhood. That would be a wonderful thing for the city of Eugene to help promote and to get going and perhaps come in some type of partnership with Lane County as far as the promotion of this stadium and this great facility within our town. I could say more and more, but I think the previous speakers have covered just about the whole gamut of the advantages and the opportunity that we have at this point in town to once again to bring the Eugene Emeralds back in the fold of being in our neighborhood. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Hebert. Next is Michael Riley. He'll be followed by Chris McAllister. Mr. Riley.
Good morning. Good morning, commissioners. My name is Michael Riley, and I'm the CEO of Tracktown USA, a Eugene-based nonprofit that is responsible for bringing the best track and field meets to our community. I am grateful for the opportunity to be an advocate for the development of an indoor multi-use sports tournament facility in Lane County, a facility which I hope will include an indoor track. I'm here this morning specifically to encourage you to direct county staff to analyze such an indoor facility concurrently with the multi-use stadium already under discussion in order to explore whether the projects might be more efficiently constructed together if they're planned well in advance. The reasons to perform this analysis are compelling. We have just concluded the greatest year of track and field in the history of Oregon. Over 2 months, Lane County hosted the national championships at the high school, collegiate, and professional level. And as you know, we hosted the crown jewel of the sport, the World Championships, a global event that brought teams throughout the world into cities throughout Lane County. Our premier annual event, the Prefontaine Classic, is currently the #1 ranked professional track and field meet in the world. No other region of the world has ever hosted such an ambitious and impressive list of top-level competition. And I say with tremendous pride that our corner of the world is the envy of every other region on the planet. Quite simply, the residents of Lane County do track and field better than anyone. But if what we've already hosted is not persuasive enough to convince you that performing the analysis makes business sense, then the potential for what this indoor multi-use facility could be should tip your point of view. In the fall of 2021, the city of Spokane opened a similar facility called the Podium. Within only 1 year of operation under its belt, this multi-use facility has already booked a staggering number of events. More than 80 events have been booked and committed through 2026. Those events are forecasted to bring more than 300,000 people to Spokane and to generate in excess of $273 million in economic impact. 80% of those events are new, and 20% of them expand existing events. The Podium demonstrates that the opportunity for Lane County to drive sports and entertainment business in the winter off-season is phenomenal. And as a result, I encourage the Lane County Board of Commissioners to direct staff to analyze an indoor multi-use sports tournament facility that would host a multitude of events as part of redeveloping the Lane Event Center campus. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. O'Reilly. Chris McAllister will be followed by the online queue. And if you'll pardon me one moment, Mr. McAllister, after the online queue, which will be administered by Ms. Jones through the ether, I will call for anyone else in Harris Hall who has a testimony who did not sign up yet. So, Mr. McAllister, please.
Thank you. Dear Mr. Chair, members of the commission, my name is Chris McAllister and I come from Springfield, Joe Bernie's district. I am here before you as the new executive director of Carry It Forward. We have projects in Springfield, Cottage Grove, Eugene, and the greater East Lane County. I come to speak on the ARPA item that you'll be addressing later. I greatly respect the incredible work that staff and committee put into the process and advocate for the great creative options that the greatest needs served possible. That said, I feel 2 important questions were missing in the process that would have given a deeper dive on to help best serve our greater community. First, if you do not receive these relief dollars, what is the overall community effect? Several nonprofits in Tier 2 served when government shut down, delayed payment, and had leadership turnover. This while paving the way to support some of the wins that we have had recently. These partners retooled and worked in tandem with stretched county and city agencies to meet the unmet needs in the framework of contracts set by federal standards and competing interests for limited resources. They have committed for the next couple of years to the local government efforts, should they be able to weather the effects of having stayed open when others closed. Dollars sought from local governments to avoid these situations have now been restricted as they pass through another layer of bureaucracy. Secondly, was your recovery related to your service to county goals or emergency efforts? We would be smaller had we not stepped forward in 2020. We've had our share of mistakes and obstacles, and we suspect that others have as well. That said, we did not go after the full amount as we are simply trying to remain in compliance, continue to serve alongside our county and city partners, and scale to the level of need that is expected by the county's pathways for funding. We cannot control third-party agents such as insurance and accountants, which have been devastated by COVID turnover and expenditures, nor can we speak to the ways that the payroll protection and small business administration loans were spent out without those doing the frontline work, lacking the safety of vaccines, testing, and backup staffing. We invested in collaborative efforts and building capacity to help our entire county meet whatever its needs. We just ask that when we do what others won't, often for free, that we are given the opportunity to recoup our losses without having to do so competitively. Every effort submitted in this process is moving forward, yet some have greater costs than others if hindered or stopped. We ask to keep on track of what we've committed to do in your big picture efforts for the next 3 years. We also ask for your advocacy for relief on the state level for all the nonprofits who worked through COVID without the resources meant for the level of emergency we faced. Thank you, St. Vinny's, Laurel Hill, Carry It Forward, HIV Alliance, Shelter Care, Whitebird, Volunteers of Medicine, Occupy Medical, Everyone Village, Nightingale Sanctuary, Burrito Brigade, Catholic Workers, and the Egan folks. All these people served when our community needed us the most. We need help. We need to be able to find a way to keep working. We have committed for the next 3 years to move forward with everybody. Let's work alongside each other. Thank you very much for your time and your consideration.
Thank you, Mr. McAllister. I'm going to say this. I didn't recognize you sitting over there. You had your mask on and your glasses, and I just didn't see who you were. I apologize for that. That concludes the signups for inside Harris Hall. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Jones to manage the online queue. Ms. Jones, do we have a queue?
Thank you, Chair Farr. Yes, at this time we do have a queue. So if you have signed up for public testimony and you would like to speak now, please raise your virtual hand so I can see how many people we have, and I will call on you in the order hands are being raised. Our first speaker will be Lorraine Booz, followed by Angie Marzano. Lorraine, I will unmute your microphone and you may begin your public comment. I show you are self-muted, Lorraine.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm concerned about the proximity of a large stadium in my neighborhood. I live a block away from the fairgrounds, and I'm not thrilled about the idea of what that will bring in terms of traffic and just the vast numbers of people that may show up there. So I have other wishes that we could consider. Out at LCC, there's a large space available that might be, people could work that out, maybe work it out with LCC to create the stadium there. I'm all for having a sports team, but I think we have to consider other options for housing. I think we need to look at that large area for either low cost housing or middle housing, and give people an opportunity to build wealth in a home in our town. And not, I don't know. I'm concerned about the way this has gone out. I'm concerned that the decision is already being, it's already a done deal before the public comment has pushed to get the process going, is not really taking into account the feeling of the neighbors in the area. It's a lot, I think, to have in our little neighborhood. I'd rather see housing there. And I think that's all I have right now. And thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you for your public comment. Our next speaker will be Angie Marzano, followed by Nolan Coogan. Angie, I will unmute your microphone and you may begin your public comment. You are self-muted, Angie.
Chair Farr and Lane County Commissioners, thank you so much for your time today. My name is Angie Marzano. My husband and I own Hot Mama's Wings. It's located at 420 West 13th Avenue, very close to the proposed site. I am here to express my support for the multi-use facility and new stadium for the Eugene Emeralds at the Lane County Fairgrounds. As you know, the M's have moved up their minor league ladder and have signed a 10-year affiliate agreement. This comes with new requirements and a longer season. They need to move, and this presents the county with a wonderful opportunity to gain an anchor tenant in a new multi-use stadium at the Lane County Fairgrounds. What would it mean for the M's to stay? It would mean their nearly 70-year legacy will live on. It would mean having a stadium that can operate as a year-round hub of economic driving activity to support the Eugene and Springfield communities and Lane County at large by hosting large-scale concert entertainment events that today skip Eugene because there's no comparable facilities. It would mean hosting youth and high school sports, including tournaments and championships that bring competitors and families from all over the region to Eugene and Springfield. That would not only play in our community stadium, but also stay in local hotels and eat at restaurants like mine, very close to the facility. I am asking that the Board of County Commissioners consider utilizing the existing Lane County Center as a possible location. The current building and facilities need drastic improvements. As much as the property is now being used as a stopgap measure for the unhoused in Eugene. I hope that Lane County can be an innovative partner with the planning and development of this project. Not only would it be an economic driver that many of the other speakers have kind of cited, it would make our beautiful city in Eugene a destination for all to enjoy. Thank you so much for your time and working toward this important investment in our community. I thank you all for your work.
Thank you for your public comment. Our next speaker is Nolan Coogan, and following Nolan, I do not show any hands raised, but I do see more people have signed up. So if you would like to speak after Nolan, please raise your hand. Nolan, I will unmute your microphone and you may begin your public comment. I show you are self-muted, Nolan. There you go.
Thank you very much. Hi, everybody. My name is Nolan Cogan. I'm born and raised in Eugene, Oregon. I was born in Sacred Heart. I went to Marist Catholic High School, and I received my degree from the University of Oregon. At one point, I used to love the city of Eugene. It gave me everything that I have in my life. When I turned 24, I overextended myself, and I purchased a rental property on 9th and Garfield. It was the greatest day of my life. When I bought that house, I accepted a job in Portland, Oregon, and in my last day ever in Eugene, Oregon, I turned my keys over to tenants. The tenants that I rented to one of them happens to be a worker for the city of Eugene. They're also low income and have a disabled child. One of the two parents is not a U.S. citizen, and I bring that up because they didn't receive COVID checks, both of them, like a lot of people did. Well, would like to talk about the homeless problem, and I have a compelling story, I think. I rent this place to them for $13.50 a month. It's a 3-bed, 2-bath. I've lost money on it every single month that I've owned it, but I get other value from renting to them. I feel good about it. They're an amazing family. They're hardworking, and they treat my rental property like it's their own. So to me, it was worth it. Well, the homeless problem has gotten so bad, and I'm talking threats, drugs, menacing behavior, and camping, both RVs and tents right outside their door. And I hope that my story serves as a warning, because I think what Eugene's biggest problem is right now is affordable housing. And the homeless problem got so bad that I'm completely done with Eugene. I'll never come back. I have no faith in its leadership, and I'm selling my house right now. When I had to tell my tenant that, he looked me in the eyes and he said that he felt like his American dream was being ripped out of his hands. And I looked him right in the eyes and I said, "You're exactly right, and it's the city's fault." When I call the city of Eugene's police to have them respond to drugs or threatening behavior, they won't respond. In fact, they're not allowed to respond to homeless. On multiple occasions, the EPD has told both me and my mom that the best way to fix this problem is to vote better. I hope that this story serves as a warning for you guys, and I would caution the city of Eugene spending any money on projects such as baseball fields, which less than 10% of the population even likes. And I would save that money for future lawsuits. I'm never coming back to Eugene, and I'm selling my rental as soon as I can, clean this homeless problem up to make the neighborhood, to make the house even sellable. You guys just lost an affordable housing and compassionate landlord. I think that you guys are going to run into a massive problem. We already know that we have a homeless problem in our hand, and it just got worse. And because I'm selling my rental and leaving the city, other tenants or landlords can raise their rent.
Thank you for your public comments. At this time, I do not show any other hands raised. I will put out a call one more time to see if anyone would like to give additional public comment that has not been able to speak yet. And I do not see any additional hands being raised, Chair Farr, so I will return the meeting to you.
Thank you, Ms. Jones, for handling the online queue. At this point, I'll ask in the Harris Hall, anyone who has not signed up to speak this morning, do you care to address the Board of Commissioners? Please step to the mic and state your name, even though I know who you are.
Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Carrie Westland. I'm the president and CEO of Travel Lane County. And we've been corresponding with you on the commission about the topic that you're going to speak to today. And I just wanted to provide some clarity on Travel Lane County's position and for you and for the public. We are very supportive of the stadium that's under discussion for the fairgrounds. And in fact, we paused our earlier work on the indoor facility in order to provide some space for the analysis on the stadium to proceed. What we're asking you to consider is to put the indoor facility sort of on the table for staff to be able to allocate some time and attention to analyze its benefits so that we might look at both projects moving forward on that campus, since you're clearly going to need to do more than just a stadium on the fairgrounds campus in any case. So we just want to get in the queue. We want to maybe look at a bigger vision and make sure that we're thinking through how we're allocating those precious resources that you'll be talking about later today to maybe accomplish a little bit more and not lose track of the work that we've put in place on the indoor facility. But I don't want to be perceived as not being supportive of the stadium, because we are supportive of the stadium. So I hope that helps, and thank you for the opportunity to provide some input.
Thank you, Ms. Westland. Anyone else wish to address the Board of County Commissioners and the public this morning? I see none, then I will close the public comments and open this up for Commissioners' response to public comments and or other remonstrance. Notation to the board, we do have a 10 o'clock time certain, seem to be in pretty good shape so far to meet that 10 o'clock time certain. So to the board. As always, you're in danger of me starting if you don't raise your Commissioner Buck. Thank you.
I'll get this going. I sincerely appreciate everybody who came out this morning. This, I think, is like the largest crowd we've seen back in Harris Hall since we've been back in person, and I love it. And it's a variety of issues. A lot of it regarding sports, which is wonderful because that's we're in the sports, I think, capital of the Pacific Northwest, it feels like. I do want to thank Mr. Tron for bringing forward ideas and solutions for homelessness. I love to hear more ideas from the community, especially when you're out there with your business and experiencing it. Those are especially helpful. I appreciate all the folks that are speaking about the M's and a possible indoor track or multi-purpose facility. I also envision the fairgrounds to be much more than it currently is. It has been drastically underfunded over several years, if not decades. And the items we're talking about today continue to be catalysts for a potential bigger and more community-wide and inclusive facility that add to our economic development in our region and our family-friendly, fun activities, things that the county is really interested in supporting. Without some real investment in the fairgrounds, I continue to think and believe that it will not get the attention it deserves, and the facilities will continue to deteriorate because they're always last on the list for investment. When we get resources, they generally go out for services, and those capital construction projects tend to be pushed off further and further. I'm excited about the possibility of stadium, and we'll talk about that here a little bit later, but I'm also really excited about the possibility of adding to the fairgrounds a potential, if it fits and if it works, another indoor type of facility. And I would like to bring up a little bit later how we might be able to add that to the discussion. But I'll wait and pause on commenting on that more until we get to that particular item. And one thing that we haven't talked about during public comment, but I wanted to remind the board, is the 2-year anniversary of the Holiday Farm Fire is coming up. And we were all sent an email of an invite from the community upriver who would love to have all the commissioners come up and go through a tour and see all the investment that we have put forward into what's actually happening on the ground. I will be there, and if anybody needs to carpool, I'm available. But it would mean so much to the community if we go, and if we need to publicly notice it because more than 2 are going, I think that would be time well used. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Buck. Further remonstrances or other comments? Going once, Commissioner Bozievich.
Thank you. And I want to thank everybody that came in for public testimony today and the folks that testified virtually. It's great that we're now offering both options because I know not everyone can make the trip here. It makes it so that folks from Florence to Oak Ridge have easy access to their elected officials. I want to note that, there was some one person that noted that, they don't feel like there's been enough public involvement. I think for the last 6 months, we've been getting written and oral testimony concerning stadium, no stadium, since the issue came up. So it's been, and there's been multiple news articles about it. So it's been out in the community. I don't think the community is unaware, and I don't think the community hasn't had a chance to contact the board with their feelings. If we choose to move forward, one of the options in moving forward is going to require us to hold a public hearing. So it's not even done yet with your opportunities to provide comment to the board. So I just want to make sure people understand that we have more board meetings coming up, more public testimony opportunities. There's always the option of emailing the board. The community is being heard. I read all those emails from the community. So just know that. I also just want to note, interesting that, Mr. Herbert spoke today because this board strongly supported the City of Eugene's request to the state legislature for bonding for the Civic Stadium rehabs. And I'm hoping the city will and the rest of the Lane County community will be just as supportive of if we did choose to move ahead with the stadium and multi-use facility at the fairgrounds, because we understand how important those community facilities are. And we like to work together as a team to better Lane County. So with that, I also think it's important to keep looking at the indoor track facility. I've been a long time supporter of the concept. It's not quite as far along. We have answered questions about how much a stadium is going to cost. We've done cost analysis. We've answered questions about what the economic impact will be. We've done economic analysis, and we also understand how it's going to be run and scheduled and who's going to be in charge of that and how that, revenues will be divided. We haven't quite gotten that far into an indoor track facility. But I think we can keep moving ahead with that because the fairgrounds needs these kinds of facilities to maintain being viable into the future. There was a time when it was, a much more vibrant place because we were allowed to have animal events 12 months of the year. But, due to environmental reasons, we've been limited. So we lost things like the Black Sheep Gathering. So this is, something that could help keep that facility viable, and it has a huge economic impact beyond, any sort of stadium and multi-use facility. As it currently, the facilities that are there and as it's currently in use generates millions of dollars in this community in economic activity, generates thousands of overnight stays at local hotels and campgrounds. So we need to keep this facility viable, and we'll have a much deeper discussion of that. But I just want to make sure people understand we aren't done yet, and you always have the opportunity to contact the board either through written or oral testimony, emails. And if we do choose to move ahead later today, there's most likely going to be a public hearing. So there'll be an even larger opportunity to provide testimony. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Commissioner Bozovich. Commissioner Burney.
Thank you, Chair. I just the pregnant pause. I'm so enthused to be here in person. I've never seen so many people at Harris Hall without masks in the last 3 years that I crutched in. So thank you all for being here. I'm going to speak about a few things, and I want to thank everyone here and remotely for testifying. Our first testimony, and sir, my eyes aren't good. I don't see. I know you're there. My pronunciation is going to be bad, but Mr. Hung Tran, I would just like to say that I personally believe that you're on to something. I have long been pushing and cajoling and encouraging the county to look at land it owns, to look at land that churches and members of the faith community own, to look at property that public education districts own, and look at how we can't partner to take advantage of opportunities as they come up. There have been a lot of federal ones, a lot of money is coming in, and how we can't really take a bite out of this, even though what we're taking a bite out of are crumbs. We're taking a bite out of a problem that we did not create. But nonetheless, we are here, we live here, and we've got to do something. And I agree that housing is number one, and you can't help people that need help unless they have shelter. So I really appreciate, Mr. Tran, your point, and I think we need to kind of figure this out. There's lots more on that, but I wanted to at least acknowledge it. I also want to acknowledge someone that hasn't an issue, and that's Chris McAllister. I always want to say Chris Christopherson. I don't know why, but Mr. McAllister, you've raised some points that I think we're going to get into later in this meeting, because I don't understand exactly, and staff will explain how we differentiated between tier 1 and tier 2, why dollars are being encouraged to get allocated. I think on this body, and Commissioner Bozovich, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you and I were two that strongly wanted more dollars from the ARA allocation to go to community nonprofits that are doing some of the heroes work, the yeoman's work in this community. So Mr. McAllister, thank you for your testimony, and you've raised questions that we'll bring up as we discuss that. I'm excited about a new M Stadium. Forgive me, I'm just going to say it. I'm excited about the good jobs. I'm excited about reinvesting in the fairgrounds. I'm excited about anything that brings people together in an era of isolation, which we've had the last few years. When I moved here 31 years ago, the gentleman that was doing work on our house talked to me about the M's. He said, the Eugene, although I really don't like the name Eugene Emeralds, I think the Springfield Eugene Emeralds and Los Monarcas de Springfield might be more appropriate, especially given the demographics of my community. But nonetheless, I do want to say that this is one of the great levelers of Lane County society. This is where you put your stars and bars at the door. You come in, you have a beer, you have a hot dog, you have a Coke, you enjoy the game. Everyone's on the same level. Kids are playing, fireworks go, so unless I hear something profoundly different, I'm delighted that that's happening. And this should not be posed as a win-lose. Investing in a stadium from dollars that could be invested in no other way does not in any way take away the higher priority of housing. And my final remarks, Chair, and thank you. As it relates to indoor track, it's interesting. the indoor track is something that the community I represent, Springfield, has always wanted in Springfield. But as things evolve and things change and budgets change and estimates for what costs will be changed, I think that the request that's been made by Mr. Riley and Ms. Westland that has to do with looking at both outdoor and indoor facilities it makes sense to me, and I'll support that as we move forward. Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Burney. Vice Chair Trieger.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. I'm hearing two really big themes. I'm gonna make similar comments to some of my colleagues and touch on the public comment and the issues before us today. But the two themes I'm hearing are how do we build community and how do we find solutions to problems that we have? And I really appreciate everyone coming out both in person and calling in. For me as the newest commissioner, having taken office last January, we didn't start meeting here in Harris Hall until just this May. And so it's still really exciting for me to be here in person and to see folks come out. Our first several months of meetings here, we would have just staff and maybe one or two members of the public. So this is great to see everyone. So I really appreciate you taking the time to be here in person. And I know it's because these issues really matter to all of you, and so they matter to all of us. And I will just sort of echo my colleagues. We do have a agenda item to go more further into this issue of improvements at the Lane Event Center and broadly more in our community, what we can be doing to invest and how we can creatively put packages of partnerships and dollars together to do that. And I just appreciate the comments everyone made about looking more. I will want to look more expansively and more broadly and not lock us into saying, what about the Lane Event Center? I will want us to have a conversation more broadly about what are the opportunities in our community to build multiple kinds of multi-purpose facilities, because we need more than one, and the more we can share the love and spread locations out, if that's appropriate, I'm going to be all for that. So the more expansive, just like with this stadium proposal, we have not made any firm decisions, but we continue to make decisions to keep the door open and do the next thing. And then when we get that information, we keep the door open and do the next thing. And so I'd like to see us do that with as many different proposals that are viable without cutting ourselves off the knees or hampering any progress that we have already made or could make on the stadium and the Lane Event Center. Specifically to some of the comments this morning and lots of emails we've received about the Lane Community College property being an option. I know there was a community member who put something out, a guest opinion piece about that. I think it's great when people have creative ideas. As I understand it, that's not sort of on the table. And for us at the county, our question isn't, do we retain the Lane Event Center and fairgrounds or not? Do we wholesale change the nature of activity there or not? It's how do we retain it and how do we protect that asset and improve that asset and expand services to the community with that asset? So as much as I think everybody here agrees that housing is a critical priority, that is something we can work on at the same time as improving and retaining our event center space and that community resource. We are always working on multiple things at one time. If we had to choose which one thing are we going to move forward on at a time, we wouldn't be doing our job. So I really appreciate everyone paying attention to all these critical issues. And I think in the interest of time, the last thing I will just say is, at our last meeting, it was in advance of the Eugene Pride Fest, and I noted that that was happening. And I want to just say that it was a tremendously positive, uplifting talk about building community event. I think the estimates are close to 10,000 people attending. It was just a beautiful day with about 200 different community booths, just a really, really wonderful opportunity for folks to come together, as was the Black Cultural Festival this last Saturday, both held at Alton Baker. And I want to appreciate Lane County for sponsoring both of those events and all of the tremendous effort on the part of community volunteers to make things like that happen and create such welcoming spaces of belonging. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Trieger. And I'll say a few things before we move along with the agenda. I'm not going to cover some of the details that my fellow commissioners have mentioned regarding what's coming up on the agenda. We'll be talking about ARP dollars. We'll be talking about other supports. We'll also be talking about the multi-use stadium. But I just want to say this. You know, I first became a Eugene City Councilor 27 years ago. And from that time, I've observed the county pretty closely. And in my observation, the county's done a superb job stewarding its resources. And I'll give a couple of examples of that. If you look at what's now the Market District area, over in the Market District area on Lane County property, you see affordable housing, including veterans housing. You see market rate housing. You see new retail and restaurants, all on former county, but this existing county property that's leased out. You also see a hotel and convention center or conference center that's on Lane County property. If you could see through this wall, you'll see what was a fallow, empty lot for a lot of years. When the county took it over, immediately it went into use. Now, a parking lot is not the highest and best use for a large piece of property downtown Eugene, but it is in use, Mr. Mulcahy. We are using it for something. If you turn around once again and look behind you, on former county property, you see the Lane County Farmers Market. So Lane County has an excellent record of making its properties, turning them to the highest and best use. Sometimes it takes a while to make that happen. But in my experience, the county is very quick at responding and very quick at being deliberative in the process. And that's exactly what's happening with the fairgrounds right now, with the fairgrounds property. We're considering an outdoor stadium. We will be considering, and Mr. Mulcahy has had this telegraphed to him by not just me, but by others. There will be some discussion regarding a consideration of a future indoor stadium potentially at the fairgrounds as we discuss that this afternoon. So the county is in process with the fairgrounds right now, much as it was in process with what was the butterfly parking lot, what was the old Health and Human Services building over here, what was the city hall, and then was an empty lot for years and years. The county does a pretty good job in my experience. And I don't say that because I'm doing a good job, because I'm no part of it. It's staff that makes this happen. And we do it in a very deliberative fashion. Mr. Mulcahy, I want to thank you for that process. I'd also like to take a second, if I can, to point out that this is a wonderful audience. I'm seeing faces that I've actually not seen in person, old friends for quite some time. I see two of the pillars of our community on housing. We're talking about housing. I see housing and human services. I see Terry McDonald sitting right there, one of the true pillars of providing housing at all levels in Lane County. I salute you once again. I've been doing it for 27 years now, Terry. And then a newer addition to our human services efforts is Carry It Forward. Sitting over here, we see Arlen Master Spain and Mr. McAllister, who testified. You're all here today. Thank you for the work you all do collectively. And the fact that you're here helps us focus on the work that needs to be done. I told Mr. McAllister last night, Chris, you shine a light on things that otherwise would be left in the dark. And we all appreciate you for that. And that's why we're here today. And that's why we really welcome this testimony. Please come back. Please continue your deliberation. Understand that you are being heard by the Board of County Commissioners, and you will continue to be heard. With that, Mr. Mulcahy, we'll move ahead with the agenda. We have a time certain in about 5 minutes, which does give us a chance to, I believe, consider our consent calendar. So to the Board of County Commissioners, we have before us a consent calendar for August 23rd, 2022. We have a number of items on the consent calendar. If you're interested, if you go to our website, click on View Material, you'll see exactly what the Board of Commissioners has considered while putting this on what is a single vote consent calendar. At this point, do I have a motion?
Chair, I'll move approval of the consent calendar for Tuesday, August 23rd, 2022.
Second.
Moved by Vice Chair Trieger and seconded by Commissioner Burney. Discussion to the motion? I'm seeing none. I'll call for the vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Passes unanimously. Then I believe, Mr. Mulcahy, we do have time briefly for possibly
6A.
6A. Let's look at 6A, which is a 5-minute item. It will be restricted to 5 minutes because we do have a number of people in the audience and online who are here for the 10 o'clock time certain. So, Mr. Mulcahy, we'll move on to 6A, which is order 22-08-2305 in the matter of approving one contract and delegating authority to the county administrator to sign the approved actions. Prior to that, Commissioner Buck.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to declare a conflict of interest as this item involves St. Vincent de Paul, Lane County, and I am related to the Executive Director of St. Vincent de Paul, so I will excuse myself from this discussion and go out in the stairwell, and then hopefully somebody can call me back in when you're done. Thank you.
Thank you for that declaration.
Chair, we have our Assistant Director of Health and Human Services, Katrina Inman, is here to answer any questions for you.
Thank you, Ms. Mulcahy. Ms. Inman, welcome.
Thank you. It's so nice to be here in person. Good morning, Commissioners and Chair Farr. We are requesting approval of one contract with St. Vincent de Paul. This is to help our Eugene Safe sleep sites. And we're requesting approval of that contract and delegation of signing authority to our county administrator. I'm happy to answer any questions if you have them.
Thank you, Ms. Inman. You know, you bring a smile to the room that makes everybody smile. Thank you for being here this morning. Discussion to the item 6A, Vice Chair Trieger.
Thank you, Chair. I'm prepared to make a motion, and I just want to note for anyone watching or folks in the room, this is an item that would ordinarily be on our consent calendar, but we pull it off of that to allow Commissioner Buck to recuse herself just from this item and not have to recuse herself from the entire consent calendar.
Thank you, Vice Chair. You ready to make a motion?
I am. I move approval of Order 22-08-23-05 in the matter of approving one contract and delegating authority to the county administrator to sign the approved action.
Second.
Moved by Vice Chair Trieger and seconded by Commissioner Burney. Order 22-08-23-05. Discussion to the motion. Commissioner Bozovich.
Briefly, I just want to say I'll be supporting the motion, but I want to note that we are starting to gather data in high enough quality to understand effectiveness of some of our homeless programs. And in the future, I will be looking seriously at that effectiveness versus contracts. You know, as we make these awards, it's a little premature now, but I just want to say that I'm so happy with our last board meeting's presentation on homelessness and some of the data we got around that we will be able to start looking at, you know, what's moving the needle the best for our homeless population into transitional and permanent housing versus just temporary, and how much that costs per person and where we should best invest our dollars. And I'm pleased to have that data coming to us. So just want to take a moment to thank staff for that and just telegraph that in the future, I'm not going to be a definitive yes vote on contracts without that analysis coming forward.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Burney.
I don't think any commissioner will be a definitive yes without looking at data. But I would like to piggyback on one thing. I think that Commissioner Bozovich's remarks demonstrate something that I'm very pleased with the county in the few years I've been doing this. And that is, we don't wait for data if a problem is immediate and intense and going without service. We don't wait for data so that we can spend 3 years figuring out what's the best way to respond to crisis. This county, and I thank you both and all the staff that aren't here, responds to crisis. And as we can, as Commissioner mentioned, as soon as we can, then we pull in data, because we can't just willy-nilly throw dollars at problems. We have to be as smart as possible about it. So I also am appreciative that at the same time we're responding to crises, we're also developing mechanisms to look at effectiveness. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Burney. And I'll tack onto that just a little bit, and thank you, Commissioner Bozovich, for mentioning the presentation 2 weeks ago on how the two presentations we actually received. And I'd asked, you may recall this, Ms. Inman, I did ask Neil Moyer from Metro to encapsulate those in a usable form, and he has done such. So both of those presentations are going to be available for public consumption. Really well done. But what that does is it begins to track data. Just producing data isn't all we need to do. We need to track it, track the progress, track the regress, and we're doing a far better job than we've done really ever at this point in time, Ms. Inman. So thank you for that. And it's not over, by the way. Case in point, Commissioner Burney.
I hesitate to be your case in point, Chair, but I am. Thank you for allowing me just to say one thing. It doesn't directly relate to this vote. Obviously will be a yes vote, but it does relate to what we just have pulled into the discussion, which is the presentation of the other week. And I did want to say at that time that there are a couple of things, and I wasn't able to because we had to move on. There are a couple of very fertile markets, I believe, for finding people rooms and shelter, and that was not discussed. And one of those areas relates to elderly that want to stay in their homes. And what this county has never considered, and what I would ask it to at some point, and I don't know if this is going to be is look at what some other areas have done, which is for those people that are 65 years and older, that are living in manufactured homes that they own or places that they own, that we freeze property taxes on them. This state has such an unbalanced tax system with no sales tax. What happens is we'll be discussing in the future, any bond, any attempt to get resources always falls on who? It falls on property owners who then, if they're landlords, pass it on to tenants and rents go out of sight. But what we have never discussed in my few years here is freezing property taxes and perhaps even lowering them in some cases for those elderly that are trying to stay in their home, especially if you tie it to their ability to rent or to provide shelter for folks that will make them less in isolation. I saw a fascinating 60 Minutes article on that in another area. So I just wanted to take advantage of this discussion to point that out. And thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Murray, and thank you, Ms. McDonald, for bringing spice to today's conversation, even though you didn't say a word. I'd also like to say that as we track data, we do know by tracking data that the 65 and older is the largest growing demographic in our homeless population. With that, I'm going to call for the vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Passes 4-0 with Commissioner Buck recused, and you may re-enter the room, Commissioner Buck. Enter and sign in, please. With that, let's call forward the panel for today's 10 a.m. time certain, which we're going to be skipping to it's item number 8A, excuse me, 8A, which is order 220823-06 in the matter of awarding a $3 million in American Rescue Plan funds for community grants and delegating authority to the county administrator to execute the contracts and other documents. And today, Ms. Mokrasi, you have a panel with you. I would turn it over to you for introductions, please.
Thank you, Chair. Robert Tintle, our ARPA American Rescue Plan Act manager, is with us. Alex Dreyer at the end of the table, our American Rescue Plan Senior Grants Analyst, and then John Barofsky, who's a community member who I believe you all know. He always introduces himself with a much more colorful job. I'll let him do that. Something about boiling noodles, I think, but obviously actively involved both in city and county issues on a number of chamber and tourism boards. And so we've really appreciated Mr. Barofsky's participation in this effort to review and recommend allocation of resources to community organizations. So I'll turn it over to Mr. Tintle to walk through the process and then have additional comments and questions from commissioners.
Thank you, Mr. McCreskey. Chair Farr, commissioners, thank you this morning for the opportunity to speak of this subject today. Just want to let you know that I'll just have a few opening comments, and then Ms. Dreer will have a presentation this morning, followed by any comments from Mr. Barofsky, and then we'll turn it back over to the chair and committee for questions and discussions there. Just want to start out by saying, as we've read through these proposals, it's evident that the need in our community is great. But it's also evident that the care and compassion demonstrated by each of these organizations is even greater. All submissions truly demonstrated the impactful work in the community through their respective program areas. Personally, reading through it, I found worth in each and every proposal. As you just read through those statements that they made, it really is heart-wrenching to see the great work that's being done. Therefore, I was thankful for the scoring matrix that was approved and developed to try to focus and narrow down the projects that were listed, because there were, as Ms. Dreer will get into the specifics, there were quite a few number of proposals for a high dollar amount. And so we needed this matrix to help form a recommendation that the committee made. So it truly was great work and effort by the committee. So I thank you for that. Specifically, I do want to thank the scoring committee, Commissioner Trieger, Commissioner Buck, John Barofsky, community member, Ms. Dreer, myself, Mary Vasquez-Schaefer, Greg Rickoff. We had a great discussion through that committee as well. So thank you all for your participation, because it was a time-consuming process to review and score each one. So thank you all for your dedication and your participation in this process. I also want to thank Valerie Vanacker, who's also our ARP member. She's here today in the audience with us. She helps staff the program and keep us all running appropriately. So thank her for her time as well. And with that, I would like to turn it over to Ms. Trier, and she'll start the presentation, and again, followed by Mr. Barofsky.
Chair Farr, Vice Chair Trieger. Am I supposed to share it from here? I am.
Alex, if you prefer, I can pull it up for you right now.
I would prefer. Thank you, Diana.
Okay.
So today we're going to cover the background of this funding opportunity, the American Rescue Plan Act community grants, an overview of the purpose and priorities, and our scoring committee's recommendations for funding. And I look forward to the discussion that follows. Next slide, please.
The second's not forwarding. One moment.
Oh, sorry. Well, in March 2022, the Board of Commissioners allocated $3 million for community grants that could go to nonprofits or public agencies that did not receive direct ARPA awards. And the opportunity was publicly posted in May and closed in July, followed by the scoring committee's review of all the applications. The grant opportunity was shared widely among nonprofits, public agencies, and featured in local news stories. Next slide. And the request for applications process document clarified the goals of the grant process and the application requirements. Next slide. To review, the Lane County has received more than $115 million in ARPA investments, which includes our direct allocation of state and local fiscal recovery funds, which these ARPA community grants will come out of. That's $74 million. We've also received a state allocation of $13 million, as well as rent assistance, utility assistance, and other ARPA grant awards that we competitively applied for. So this list shows the allocations to date. And as you can see, significant investments have been made in the high need areas of housing, homelessness, and public safety. Next slide. Before we present the recommendations for funding, as a review, the purpose of the grant opportunity was to respond to the public health emergency of COVID-19, its negative economic impacts, assist people who have been disproportionately impacted by the pandemic, as well as provide gap or last mile funding for projects with significant community or additional investment. Next slide. And the program focus areas for this funding, as determined by the county commissioners, were affordable housing, mental health services, especially for youth, projects that serve rural Lane County, given that the cities of Eugene and Springfield also received their own direct ARPA allocations, and services for disproportionately impacted communities. Next slide. A focus on equity was at the forefront of this grant opportunity in order to prioritize communities most negatively affected by systemic inequities and the COVID pandemic. Equity was a core criteria for scoring applications. Next slide. This was a very competitive grant opportunity. 71 applications were received, 64 from nonprofit organizations and 7 from public agencies, which includes special districts. The 71 applications totaled 15.7 million in ARPA requests, which would leverage 95 million. So that compares the ARPA request to the total project budget. Next slide. Applications were pre-screened to prioritize communities hardest hit by the COVID-19 public health emergency. And the pre-screening was conducted by Lane County staff, including the equity manager. The pre-screening was designed to ensure that ARPA funds are invested in organizations that have a commitment to equity, as well as projects that clearly relate to the COVID-19 pandemic, as that makes them eligible for ARPA funding. In order to share information gleaned from this process, the equity manager compiled feedback for all applicants about the activities that our organizations are doing to actively address diversity, equity, and inclusion in their organizations. This information has been shared with all applicants as a resource as organizations progress in their work to address equity. So what we've learned from this process has been shared with all applicants in a strengths-based manner. Next slide. On the screen, you can see the pre-screening scoring matrix, which was posted with the request for applications. Of the 71 applications received, 44 passed pre-screening and were forwarded to the scoring committee. Applications that did not pass pre-screening are those that did not receive an average pre-screen score of greater than or equal to 7 out of 10. The majority of the tier 3 projects which did not pass pre-screening did not score above a 6. The process highlights the very competitive nature of this grant opportunity and the successful use of the scoring matrix to narrow down the 71 submissions to the available $3 million. It's also unlikely that projects that did not successfully articulate the pre-screening core criteria of equity and how the project relates to responding to the COVID-19 pandemic would be competitive given the nature of the opportunity. And if projects do not have a direct correlation to pandemic recovery, they're not eligible for ARPA dollars. Next screen. So the scoring committee was comprised of 2 county commissioners. Thank you, Commissioner Buck and Commissioner Trieger, for your time and dedication to this, scoring 44 distinct applications. We had 1 community member, John Barofsky, who will share some comments at the end of my presentation, and 4 Lane County staff. The scoring committee recommends funding tier 1 projects, which are listed in attachment A of your board packet. They're listed alphabetically. Tier 1 represents 17 projects for a total of $3 million. The scoring committee wanted me to note that they conscientiously reviewed applications and present this recommendation in earnest. They particularly looked at diversity in geographic location and type of project and tried to balance projects that meet immediate COVID-19 recovery needs and those that will have lasting transformative impacts on the community, but ultimately it came down to the scores. Next slide. The 17 recommended projects demonstrate great geographic diversity across the county. This includes 6 projects that have a county-wide reach, 3 Eugene-specific projects, 4 South Lane, 1 East Lane, and 2 West Lane. Next slide. One of the core focus areas for this funding opportunity was mental health services with a focus for youth. So these projects listed are the ones recommended for funding in tier 1, and they represent services that are mental health or healthcare focused, including Ophelia's Place project, which addresses mental health for youth. Next slide. Now we get into the recommended projects that address social services and is in particular serving people who have been disproportionately impacted by COVID-19 and the pandemic. And I will note that all applications are listed publicly on our website, and there's a link to them in the board packet. I want to call out specifically some of these projects, which include the Mackenzie Valley Long-Term Recovery Group, serving rural residents of unincorporated Lane County who were impacted by the Holiday Farm Fire, and other social service projects that provide important services. Next slide. As commissioners are well aware, housing remains a top priority for the community, and these 3 projects would address housing and represent significant leveraged community investment in housing projects, especially for our most vulnerable. I want to note that Homes for Good requested funds to support COVID-19 related shortfalls and operating costs for permanent supportive housing projects, including the Commons on MLK and the NEL, and the scoring committee recommends funding the shortfalls of the Commons on MLK project only. Next slide. Finally, the scoring committee recommends supporting the arts and economic development through these 2 projects, which would support Lane Arts Council and the Center for Rural Livelihoods. Next slide. The scoring committee recommends projects listed in tier 1 in attachment A. They're listed alphabetically. Most projects are not receiving their full ARPA request. Applicants were asked to clarify if they could scale their project given limited funding. So that information was taken into consideration when determining the project allocations. The total amount requested from tier 1 projects was $4.3 million, which the scoring committee reduced to the available $3 million. This concludes my presentation, and now I welcome our community member who served on the scoring committee, John Barofsky, for some comments.
Thank you, and thank you, Chair Farr, Vice Chair Krieger, and the rest of the commission. Like I said, I'm John Barofsky. I'm a community member on this committee. Just a little background or whatever, I would say if somebody calls you and asks you to volunteer for a committee, ask how many RFPs you have to go through before you say yes. It was a very interesting process. I was happy to join the committee because I've seen the ARPA dollars and some of the concerns that I had with ARPA dollars was that a lot of them were being used to shore up municipal and county funds, make sure that our county governments and our city governments were able to operate by shoring up some of the impacts that the COVID-19 had on their budgets. And I really was encouraged that this was going to be going out to some of the frontline people and the nonprofits that were doing a lot of the real good work on the grounds and not just going to bolster a city or a county's budget. And so that was something that made me want to get involved with this. I think that the committee was very diligent in their deliberations. I know I was reading through all these RFPs was a double-edged sword because they were all very worthy. And I knew that there wasn't enough funds to fund them all. As you saw, there was $15 million worth of asks and $3 million available. It was a very eye-opening experience for me, looking at all of the different agencies that did put in the RFPs and the work that they did and how much they're benefiting our community and our county. So that was very encouraging. As far as the process goes, there was a robust conversation at the scoring committee. We had to do a lot of massaging, I would say, to get to that $3 million number. It wasn't easy, taking worthy applications and saying, do we really need to give them all of this money, or can we siphon off a little bit of it so that we can fund this other one to a certain extent? And I think it was robust. I think it was healthy. And I think the presentation that was put together is as best as we could do. I think there's always going to be people that say, I wish mine was funded or was funded to a more robust amount. But I think that we did our best to balance all that we had to do. I'm glad that there was some citizen involvement. I think in the future, more would be appropriate, more than just one person. But the staff was very professional. And I think by having two county commissioners on there, they represent a broader community other than just staff. So I think it was a well-rounded committee, and I was happy to be a part of it.
Thank you, Chair Farr. That concludes our presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Tyndall, Mr. Borowski, and Ms. Dreyer. Discussion questions from the board. I'll begin with Commissioner Buck.
I always try to get this started off. So waste time.
So I don't have to start again.
I really appreciate you coming on board, Mr. Barofsky, and helping us out. This was really challenging, as you mentioned. There are some fantastic nonprofits in our community that are doing really excellent work, and it was heart-wrenching not to be able to fund all of them to their full potential. And it was give and take. I mean, we knew we couldn't fund them all, and each person on the committee had a different perspective that we're all trying to come together around. In as a commissioner who was on the committee, we didn't see those items that were on tier 3. Those were already pre-screened, and then we were able to see the 44 additional ones that made it to the next level of review. And then those got narrowed down to tier 1. And I just want to say thank you to every single one of those nonprofits who took the time to put in their application. They're doing wonderful work, absolutely wonderful work. It was really challenging to see that there were a lot of people who applied for the full $500,000, and we just knew that that would be a very small amount of people if all we did was fund those that were at $500,000. And we really wanted to include as many organizations as we possibly could and meet the requests that they had provided. It was, as you mentioned, extremely competitive. And I don't know where we are with the remaining ARPA dollars. I think we have another 5 left in contingency, and we're kind of waiting to see how it goes. If we have any additional later on, that's a big if. I'd love to be able to reevaluate some more that are in tier 2, but we don't know if that's possible quite yet because there is such great need. So thank you to those that applied. I'm sorry if you didn't quite make it to tier 1, but I'm also very interested to hear what the rest of the board has to say about the tier 1 and the variety of different applications that we saw.
Thank you, Commissioner, for the discussion. Then I'm sorry, Vice Chair Faber, go ahead.
Some space since I got, thank you. So I got to be on the committee. I really want to appreciate Mr. Barofsky as a community member giving his time, and would say, my fellow commissioners, if you're invited to be on a screening committee, you also might want to ask how many RFPs will be reviewed, because it was a lot. More than 20 years ago, I was a volunteer with United Way on one of their fund distribution screening panels. And that was my first time of having to make a difficult decision. And I remember them as in part of the training doing an exercise with us where they gave us each a giant oversized phony paper dollar, and you could cut it into as many little pieces as you wanted. And then there was a giant wall with all the applications, all the community needs that needed funding. And you could allocate your $1 however you wanted. You could put it all in one, you could cut it in half, you could cut it in 17 pieces if you wanted. And it was such an important exercise and so interesting, and why it was so good that we had a team of folks reviewing these to see what the cumulative effect and perspective of a panel that was allocating funding would do, and how in some ways it differed, but also how kind of in alignment it was with each individual person. And I feel like this process daylighted that same result for us, that every single one of us saw the value in every single application. And yet also understood that we couldn't possibly meet all the requests. And so what were we going to do and how about that? That would feel right, both in terms of the services we were providing, the range, the breadth of types of service, the geographic reach, and more. So we had some really great conversation in that allocation discussion. I want to really appreciate the matrix that we were provided, not only for the scoring one, but the way to understand it as it relates to our strategic plan. Because again, these dollars came to us. They're our responsibility to allocate appropriately, not only with sort of rules and regulations, but with the container we've created as Lane County with our strategic plan, which is also developed through a really robust process. So that was really helpful to me, and also pointed out for me some of the gaps in our strategic plan around the kinds of things our community wants and needs to be a thriving community that we don't really talk about, like arts and culture, for example, a lot in our strategic plan. So it was just a really great process to go through. It was very time consuming, and I can only imagine for staff how time consuming it was if it took us, because y'all did a ton of work before it even got to us. So thank you for that. I do want to say, appreciating both that this board made the decision to take this $3 million and create the community grants fund, but also point out that the investments that we have made outside of that process also are there to serve really critical community needs. The comment of it sort of shoring up a county budget, it's a budget that exists to deliver services to the community that are very much parallel to what these applications are. So really the entirety of the ARPA investment is going back out to serve our community, and in many cases the most vulnerable and marginalized populations in our community. I have a question. I don't like to spring questions on you, so I'm not, if you have the answer off the top of your head. I loved the total applications were 17 point some and would leverage 95 million. Do we know what the 3 million that we are investing will leverage?
No, I will get that.
Great, thank you. I'm sorry I didn't think of that in advance to ask you that, to pull that together, but I'm curious about that. And I think we can talk about the contingency fund and the set aside later. I think that's a very separate conversation with separate considerations from this. So I will just, again, offer my appreciation to everyone involved and say, I feel really good about and really proud of and really comfortable with the dollar amounts, the range of projects that we landed on, the geographic reach and the real impacts that these will make, as we've talked about with our investment allocation at the from the board. Another piece that wasn't on the matrix, but it was in my mind, was dollars that really leverage, one-time dollars that leverage real long-term change and real innovative programming was another consideration. And some of these things very much get at that, and I'm very excited about it. And one of them I want to particularly appreciate Mr. Barofsky for elevating a conversation where we got to really dig in about the Institute for Nursing Excellence and how an investment a one-time small investment now really has the potential to make a huge impact on many, many people in the community for many years to come. So that was a very important consideration, and I thank you for that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Further discussion? Commissioner Bozovic.
And then sure. So I want to thank John for serving, and for the last 10 plus years, I've been a founding member of the Three Rivers Foundation Board and their vice chair. We get well over 100 applications, and the deadline's basically Christmas. So I spend my week from Christmas to New Year's reading grant applications. So, and I dragged our chair into that organization recently, so he got to do that last Christmas also.
I wasn't kicking and screaming, but in retrospect.
Yeah. But we had the fortunate situation this last grant cycle where they actually had more money than grants requested. And we actually went back and asked people, could they use more money? It's almost always the other way around, where we would have 5 times the amount of requests that we had money to give out. So I know that it's a really tough process, and you have to say no to some really great organizations, or you have to tell them they're only going to get a piece of what they asked for. Even in tier 1, if I did the math correctly, is $5,734,959 of requests that we're only granting $3 million. So understanding that, and that, some people didn't make the cut. I hope they appreciate just how difficult this sort of decision is. And as I look at the list, there's some, I might move some tier 2s into tier 1 and some tier 1s down in my mind very quickly, but I didn't look at the detailed applications, and I wasn't part of the committee, and I'm not going to second guess that process. So I'll be supporting when somebody makes the motion to make the tier 1 grants. I just wish we had more resources to do this kind of work with. Fortunately, there's a lot of other good organizations out there doing similar work, from the Ford Family Foundation to the Grand Ron Community Foundation to the Confederated Tribes that I serve on. I just wish there was more, because there's such a need out there, and so many great organizations doing great work. You just wish you had money to give them to say yes to everybody, don't you? And it's a very tough thing to do. And it was great we had the opportunity to do this. It's great we got a community member to be willing to look through 71 applications. I just want to say, thank you for your time. Thank you to the staff. Thank you for the 2 commissioners that went through this. Very familiar with having to do that. And cutting that dollar up is really hard. So thank you to everybody.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Just a quick note, I'm in my 5th year now on the Three Rivers Foundation. So not just last year, but 5 years now. So. Yeah. Commissioner Burney.
I would like to remind commissioners, if we really wanted to have more money, we could make that decision. We don't know one another. I know of you, Mr. Barofsky. So let me get this straight. There were 4 staff, 2 county commissioners, and 1 citizen. Well, now, sir, you know the definition of token. If there are future processes like this, I would encourage staff to bring in citizens that have experience with foundation giving and have experience with the process of saying no. Not, present company withstanding it, it's not a constraint. It's just there's a lot of other resources in the community. I'm now going to collegially disagree with everyone. Well, Commissioner Bozovich, I understand your pain sometimes. One of the reasons why I unsuccessfully wanted community benefit lens to be a lens as opposed to a diminished priority when we look at not just public construction projects, but all public sector contracting, is because I have a real concern for living wage jobs, for healthcare benefits for employees of the people that we contract out to, all of the concerns, some of which many members of this body agree with, some may not, minority and women-owned business set-asides, all of that, the environment, which is why I did. So you say equity was a criteria. So I'm going, if I may, and I am going to put you on the spot, not intentionally, it's just that this is our opportunity to talk. Had I known and had time and wasn't spending mornings in hyperbaric chambers trying to deal with these feet, I would have had a little more time. What is the average salary of professionals with the groups that you're contracting with? Do you know?
Commissioner, Chair, Commissioner Burney, I do not have that information.
I didn't think you did, but you will remember when I was on the Health and Human Service thing, and you were staffing that. One of the issues that probably Commissioner Trieger is wherever you are is still an issue. Are salaries that are able to be paid to nonprofits that are doing the on the ground work. That's why I think living wage is important. I also believe with community benefits, leveraging real dollars, the leveraging dollars that I presume you showed us is what was reported to you from the applicants. I don't know that we have the staff to really dig into what that really means. And I'm not suggesting we do. However, it's very clear leverage was identified up there, but it was not a priority, because if it was a priority in making selection, you would have known how many dollars those particular applicants leveraged, and I'm sure you can add it up, but it wasn't something that was right there. So I'm just pointing out some concerns. I believe in the presentation you said that these were dollars that we competitively applied for. I thought, were these dollars that were allocated to Lane County, or did Lane County in fact competitively apply for these dollars? Mr. Mokraheisky?
Chair Burney, sorry, Chair Farr, Commissioner Burney, if I may answer that question. These funds are coming from our direct allocation from the U.S. Treasury that we received as part of our allocation.
That's what I thought. Thank you, sir. And the first thing that this body did was agree on what were internal county government priorities, which is part of what ARPA was for, and fund those, correct? So how many dollars do we have that are set aside for contingency or unexpended if this $3 million is made a decision on? All our other decisions are made. How much, in fact, is left in contingency out of the ARPA allocation of non-county dollars that the county received?
Yeah. Chair Farr, Commissioner Burney. Based on previous board decisions, there is $5 million left to be allocated out of the $74 million that the county has received.
Thank you. Board, I would ask that we consider changing that amount and I'm sure the administrator will tell me why I'm all wet because we haven't had an opportunity to talk about this, but changing the amount in reserves, which I don't think should be higher than the amount that we're pushing out to community nonprofits doing this work at a minimum so that it's equal, which would increase the allocations by $1 million. That's one thing I would like at least input on, thoughts on. And another item I would like thoughts on is Chair, am I allowed to ask a question to a member of the audience?
I'll say yes.
Okay, because I didn't know.
Now, typically we don't because they're not a part of the panel and they've not been announced, but please go ahead.
Well, if I may, Mr. McAllister, what was your issue with this? Because you spoke, but I was trying to understand, is carry it forward is in tier 2, correct? So it's not even a part of this. Could you very succinctly explain what your issue with this is?
Do it in a microphone too.
This is Mr. Chris McAllister, who would step to the microphone and take a moment or two to respond to that question.
And thank you, Chair. I didn't realize it was not protocol.
Just a quick summary is we took on contracts to serve during COVID and only during COVID. And so therefore the fees and things that we had to deal with because of that were consistent with that need. And so by being able to pay and do the process required for county projects for having received such monies, we have to clear those debts in order to be able to continue to be in standing with county to be able to fulfill our contracts with the county moving forward or to apply for additional monies. We can only go after grants at this point.
And why were you, in your understanding, not the tier that's being funded at this time?
We were competitive, but there are other projects here in different categories that were not necessarily directly tied to the type of work we were doing for the county.
Thank you, Mr. McAllister.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. So I brought up concerns. I have a feeling I'm a minority of one, but I at least wanted to bring those up to this body because it is in our charge to make those decisions. Thank you, Chair.
And thank you, Commissioner Burney. I'll move to Commissioner Krieger in just a moment before I take my first round. I'll say that the reason we don't typically invite people from the audience is because they aren't a part of the panel. They're not expected. And equitably, how do we let one person speak and not others? And that's typically why. But in this situation, Commissioner Burney, I thought it was appropriate. So Vice Chair Krieger.
Thank you, Chair. I wonder if we could bring the slide back up that shows the big buckets of investment that we have made with our ARPA dollars prior to the $3 million community grants fund. That would be great. And I will just also remind there is a link to every single application, all of the materials that the committee reviewed to better understand the depth and breadth of what we had before us to consider in terms of information regarding each of the 44 applicants' total organizational budget, how the program they were applying for fit in, how this funding fit into that program, and so on and so forth. So, but just pulling back to this to make the point about investments in the community and in the to address community needs with our ARPA dollars. This slide shows how that is exactly what we have done already. So this $3 million was a mechanism for funding specific programs, but not by any stretch nearly the only way we are investing in addressing the critical community needs with these one-time dollars. So I just really wanted to put a pin in that, those numbers right there. And then also just ask, I know we haven't heard from the chair yet, but that we, if there is some conversation about the contingency 5 million that we, if we want to ask for that to be an assignment or a future item, but that we stick with the order before us.
Thank you, Vice Chair. And you actually saved me a little bit of breath. Now, I have a question for you, Ms. Mokryski, and maybe Ms. Jindal, you can weigh in on this. The $5 million it is in contingency, a prudent amount based on analysis that you've done. Can you explain why $5 million would be held back and what is the future consideration for that? What type of things would be the future consideration?
Chair Farr, thank you for the question. The board has remained and kept the $5 million thus far, given the uncertainty of the pandemic at the time we made the initial decisions, not knowing where we would end up going with additional costs, if there were still continue to be additional variants. In addition to that, part of the biggest costs that we have unknown at this time are the FEMA reimbursements for all the work that Health and Human Services has submitted reimbursement for or still plans on submitting reimbursement for. Until FEMA actually provides the funding, there is no guarantee of that. And as you know, that takes a long time. It's not just funding from FEMA, but it's from the various other programs. So in our response to the public health emergency, our major department, Health and Human Services, has expended a large amount of money. And until we get those full reimbursements, we want to make sure that we're able to fully recoup all those costs. And that's what part of that contingency is for.
Is there an approximate time frame on certainty on that?
On spending the ARPA dollars or
no, on the potential use of the contingency? Is it within the next 6 months or?
The contingency is what we've set aside at this point. All ARPA dollars need to be allocated, contracted out by December 31st, 2024, and then spent by December 31st, 2026 for federal ARPA.
Okay. The reason, the nature of my question was at some point in the not too distant future, could we consider some of the tier 2 for use of the remainder of the contingency? And I'm trying to figure out what does the near future mean. So,
and I would say, Chair, yes, that the board has the discretion, and you know, you have the discretion to spend that $5 million in contingency today if you wanted to. We're recommending that you not do that because we still have another year and a half to about I guess a year and a half until the end of 2024, by which those funds need to be committed, and then by 2026 they need to be spent. And as Mr. Tyndall said, there's been a lot of obligations, both as the primary service provider throughout COVID and continuing with both response and recovery work. We want to make sure that that we have the ability to meet the needs and recover the costs necessary. And then where there are available funds for other community interests, that we certainly can make those available. So I think what we're recommending to you is some financial discipline and discretion, and ultimately those $5 million will get spent on providing necessary services to the community, particularly to vulnerable community members that are in need, and priorities of the Board of Commissioners. We're just recommending that you not spend all of those dollars today, because they're inevitably there are both needs and expenses that either have been incurred or needs that have not yet been identified, that we think it would be wise for you to be able to allow some time for those to come to light.
Great explanation. Thank you both. And really, I think that gives clarity on where the $5 million is and what it potentially could be spent on in the future. Now, I agree with Commissioner Burney that we need to push out as much as we possibly can. We've already pushed out a lot, and my recommendation is going to be this. It's going to be that we hold on to the $5 million, that we, as we move into the future, that the tier 2 applicants be considered among other uses of that $5 million when the time comes to spend that. Is that clear? Am I making that fairly clear? And that would be the recommendation that comes from the chair. Now, I'm only one person on this voting body, but that's a recommendation that comes from the chair. And the reason that I look at tier 2 in particular, there are a couple of agencies on tier 2 who really did continue to operate as normal during COVID times, who put people in the organization at risk in some cases, of directly in the front lines at risk. And Mr. McAllister has pointed that out, but it's not just Carry It Forward. I think Shelter Care is probably another agency that really had people at very low wages, Commissioner Burney, actually stepping out above and beyond what is the normal call of duty. So as we move forward with the allocation of that $5 million for the future, when that time comes, I will want to look at tier 2 and how do we begin to recompense some of the agencies that are on tier 2. But in the meantime, Mr. Barofsky, when you walk into a room, I wonder which public service hat you're wearing, because I served with you on the Travel Lane County Board, for instance. You were on our performance evaluation audit board. City of Eugene Budget Committee. So what hat are you wearing?
It all depends on what time it is.
And sometimes you're boiling noodles, and sometimes you make the best pizza that I've ever had. Very good. Then with any further debate, discussion, then I'll call for the motion.
Chair, I will preface making my motion by saying I've been hearing a lot about we wish we had more resources. And I think one of the things we're doing with these dollars and the dollars we've already allocated is working our way toward having fewer needs. So ideally, eventually, someday those two things will cross. It's a long way off, but I would like to move the passage of Order 22-08-23-06 in the matter of awarding $3 million in American Rescue Plan funds for community grants and delegating authority to the county administrator to execute the contracts and other documents.
I'll second.
Well, no, you go ahead, second.
I'll second.
Thank you. Gently at first, but more authoritatively, subsequently moved by Vice Chair Trigger and seconded by Commissioner Buck. Then without further discussion, I will call for the motion. Oh, I'm sorry, discussion to the motion.
I would like to offer a friendly amendment to incorporate the chair's statement. I'm going to pick a time arbitrarily so we can discuss that, but before the end of this year to report back on what things are looking like and when staff think we might be able to look at taking some of those dollars out of contingency, some, not all, and how much is up to you, putting them into this community awards category. And as the chair said, consider recompensing some of the proposals in tier 2.
I'll look to the maker. Oh, excuse me, Ms. Tyndall, please.
Chair Farr, if I may, just a reminder to the board, the ARPA team is scheduled to come back September 23rd for an annual presentation. Now that's way sooner before the end of the year, but before we'd be willing to commit additional funds. But I just want to let you know, we will be providing an update on, as of our June 30th report that we submitted to the Treasury, providing an update there. So we will have an opportunity for more discussion at that time if you'd like.
Then I'll ask you, Commissioner Burney, does that cover the components of your friendly amendment? Would that cover it adequately?
No, not if, correct? No, not if, according to Mr. Tyndall, he is unwilling, although I think we're the ones that need to be willing or not, but he's unwilling to look at that point, that subject. So I don't think that covers the potential friendly amendment, which I don't even know if the proposer wants to accept.
Can I look to the maker of the motion to accept or modify the friendly amendment?
No, I would like the order to stand as it's written in our packet. And if there's a board request or assignment for another topic related to this, that come later. Thank you.
Then I'll ask if there's a second to what is potentially a not so friendly amendment.
I just want to add a comment, is that part of the unknown here is we don't know when FEMA is going to reply to our request. So the challenge here is we may want to discuss it earlier, but until we hear back from FEMA, we won't be in a position financially to be able to make that decision and feel good about our financial situation. At least I would not. So I don't know that it's the fact that our staff is unwilling. I think it's really, we're at the will of the federal government at this point. And until we hear back, I don't feel comfortable moving forward with that. But as soon as we do, I would very much like to have that discussion.
Thank you, Commissioner. Then I'll look to you, Commissioner Burney. You have a proposed friendly amendment which hasn't been accepted. Do you wish to make that as an amendment and look for a second?
I do. And the reason I do is, if I may, is because normally in my experience with public bodies, one looks at reserves of about 10 or 15, sometimes 20%. If that 10 or 15 or 20% had been applied, we'd be looking at about $17 to $20 million in reserve. It was this body that made that choice. And it's this body that can determine how much is in reserve. So again, absolutely support moving forward on this, but I do want to, if possible, keep that friendly amendment in there, or that amendment in there.
And the maker of the motion wishes the motion to stand. Is there a second to the amendment? Commissioner Burney, that amendment fails for lack of second, but thank you for the amendment. Then moving forward, any further discussion to the motion? I see none. I will call for the vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Passes unanimously. Thank you for the presentation. Thank you for the work. And thank you for everyone else who came to listen to that particular discussion and look to the future to see what happens next. I have heard, Ms. Mokrahisi, that we have no council or county council announcements, which dispense with item 7. So we'll move along directly to item 8B, which is a report on an order on which is number 22082307 in the matter of reporting on the proposed Lane Event Center multi-use community facility and directing the county administrator on project funding options. Can we delay this to next week? I'm kidding.
So moved. You're doing well on time.
We're doing well on time. So, Mr. Mokrahisi, I'll look to you to introduce what is an excellent panel today. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair and Commissioners. Appreciate that. I will introduce the group here. Christine Moody, our budget manager, budget and financial planning manager for Lane County, Corey Buller, our Lane Event Center manager, and Sean Waite, our facilities and capital projects manager. So I'll make some introductory comments. We want to walk through, you do have a memo, and for those watching, if you go to the agenda and click on view material, there's a memo as well as a couple of attachments. It includes a economic analysis from Echo Northwest on this project that was conducted last September, I believe. And then we have a project cost estimate done by the Turner Group. So we'll touch on each of those. I want to start just by saying that, of course, you heard public comment, and there was some really great public comment and thoughts and feedback that encompassed a number of things that we will share with you here today. But I want to start by saying that we're here really to talk about Lane County's gathering place. You heard that there have been a number of visuals evoked in these conversations, particularly from community members, calling about the visual of a return to Civic Stadium. We've talked a lot about the Lane Event Center as our gathering place, and that really is how we like to think about the Lane Event Center. This is a 40+ acre campus in the heart of our major metro area. And when you think about the old Civic Stadium, it had some elements of that, and that it was in a community. It was a location that broadly the community felt compelled to gather in and come to. And so one of the things that we've been excited about this project is, one, the partnership with the M's and the idea that this could be a home to a multi-use community facility that would be anchored by the Eugene Emeralds, an organization that's been in our community since 1955 and for long operated at Civic Stadium, and for the last several years has been at PK Park on the University of Oregon's campus. And now that the M's have been promoted to high A level with a longer season, the M's need a new facility, or the team will have to leave our community. So that's sort of the opportunity statement about why we're here talking about this issue. And again, one of the reasons that we felt like over a year ago when the M's approached us, and they were looking at over 12 different sites, potential sites. So there's been a lot of due diligence by the team itself, looking at different locations in the community that could be viable and could meet different needs that the team has. They approached us about the potential of the Lane Event Center. And at the time, we were in this process of working through our master plan and facility feasibility study and really thinking about what is the future of our Lane Event Center facility. And so we sort of had this, a little bit of a light bulb went off in terms of thinking about the Lane Event Center truly as our community's gathering center, a place not only that we host events year round, but a place that the community comes. You think about the last couple of years in particular, that the community has come and been vaccinated through mass vaccination clinics, that we have set up multi-agency resource center services for folks who've been affected by the Holiday Farm fire, that we've had smoke respite sites and winter shelter opportunities. All of this has happened. Any season of the year, we'll get there's something that happens. It could be an emergency need or community celebration. And oftentimes folks will come forward and say, well, what about the Lane Event Center, right? Because it truly is our community's gathering place. So county staff has worked with the M's for months to assess the viability of a new multi-use community outdoor facility Findings have been presented to the board in December. The board directed us to work with the M's to determine the viability of the project, whether or not it could be sited at the Lane Event Center. The board has been responding to consistent broad public support and recognizing the strength of the M's organization. The M's have been a really strong and great partner with us throughout this effort. And commissioners have asked staff to assess the feasibility of locating the facility at the event center, recognizing that it could also serve not only as a home to an anchor tenant in the for the Eugene Emeralds, but also serve as a venue for concerts, for school events, for tournaments, and as an emergency shelter. Again, I'll say the Emeralds are a proven operator, and that has been a key part of why throughout the due diligence process we have had a strong confidence in the viability of this project, understanding we have to answer three primary questions. Can this facility actually be sited in this location? Do we have the land? Is it appropriate use? Can it be sited? Two, do we have the funding available? Can we pursue the fund? Is there funding available that we can pursue to actually make the construction of the facility viable? And then three, do we have an operator that can run the operations of this facility ongoing and make sure that in the public trust that this is something that is financially viable, not just the construction, but the ongoing operations. So that has been the due diligence that we have continued to pursue. I will note that this project does address an objective the board has identified in your current strategic plan under vibrant communities to evaluate a multi-use community facility with the Emeralds baseball program as an anchor tenant. As part of this due diligence that the board has directed us to pursue, an economic analysis by Echo Northwest, as I noted, has been completed. That is in your packet, and I will just briefly note that in addition to the construction impacts, the economic impacts from construction, economic output from construction, that the ongoing economic output is estimated at nearly $32 million per year, 291 jobs, and $8.7 million in labor income. It's also been identified that over 20,000 more hotel room nights and over $4.1 million in additional hotel room revenues would be generated from this facility. That's in large part because of the expansion of the number of games, as well as the other events that would be hosted at the facility. So that economic analysis is in your packet for consideration. We've also hired a number of consultants that you have that are identified in the memo in your packet. We've looked at construction and preliminary agreements with the Emeralds. That is, we'll talk through some of those estimates here. There are a series of agreements that are still in discussions and negotiation with the Emeralds that would need to be executed by both the county and the team in the future. So there are a lot of steps in this process. We are working through agreement on terms of use of the facility with the Emeralds, and those discussions continue. The board passed an order in June approving the exemption to the competitive bidding process. We have issued an RFQ, and Sean Waite will touch on that. In terms of one-time costs, we are trying to identify as much one-time funding, upfront funding as possible. We've identified approximately $17.5 million in upfront funding. That includes $10 million from the team and $7.5 million from the state of Oregon. That's important, and growing that number of upfront, that amount of upfront funding is critical because it helps lower the long-term financing costs of the project, gives us more resources to spend on the actual construction of the project if we end up doing that, as opposed to having to put limited resources into financing of the project. So that's a key piece that the team has been very supportive of that effort, and we do think there's opportunity to go back to the legislature for additional funding if this project moves forward. So the board asked us in May of this year to identify additional funding options, and we will walk through what those look like. That is the primary question in front of you today, and what we were looking for direction from the board on is if you want to continue to pursue this project, we really need direction on new revenue, and we'll walk through the project costing estimates that that we're looking at. So I want to turn first to Sean Waite and ask, in your packet, you have an estimate from Turner that gives you a range of $60 to $80 million. That is project cost estimates. The significant variable there that we just don't know, it is a range, and what we won't know until we go to bid are the labor and materials costs and ultimately the financing costs. So there is some variability there. We do believe that we can build along with our consultants, we have confidence that we can build a project in terms of construction costs in that range. The unknown factor, again, of course, is the materials, labor, and financing costs. So Sean, I just ask you to touch on the process to date as it relates to construction estimates, the RFQ, and our assumptions related to costs.
Thank you, Steve. Chair, Commissioners, as Steve mentioned, in your packets, there is a report from Turner Construction that outlines some estimated project costs. There are some areas that we look at that cost estimate, and there's some value engineering that we believe can be done. So we are going to be looking at that. In addition, that estimate does not include immediate occupancy requirements. So that needs to be calculated as well. So we are working with a project management firm that's helping us kind of define what those costs would be. So we're looking at the Turner report and what amenities were included in that we may or may not need, and then also look at what immediate occupancy would cost. So we are hoping that by mid-September, when we come back, that there will be two cost estimates that you can take a look at, one at immediate occupancy build and one without. So we are working on that. Additionally, as directed by the board, we have continued with the due diligence. That includes the environmental and geotesting, the traffic impact analysis, planning and engineer, and some public outreach. As of last week, a memo of understanding for cost sharing was signed with the Emeralds and Lane County, and the Emeralds have agreed to pay 50% of a majority of those due diligence costs. The county is currently covering all costs for due diligence out of our capital fund. So in the packet, we have asked also that the Lane County costs are reimbursed through possibly TRT. So that is for consideration. The TRT that's, let me specify, allocated to Lane Event Center currently. So it's not a new ask. Currently, an RFQ was issued in July and closed on August 12th. We received 4 responses. An RFP is scheduled to be posted to the list of responsive firms by August 25th, and a response from those firms will be due on September 1st. Staff will return to the board in October with options if additional funding is identified. One thing that we are still under negotiation, as Steve referenced, is the operational maintenance costs, which would be additional to the construction costs as well as the debt costs. So we're currently undergoing negotiations with the Emeralds for those as well. And I think that summarizes where we're at with the technical pieces of the project.
Thank you, Sean. And so I'd like to ask Christine just to walk through the recommendations we have in front of you and the assumptions that we're making. I'll make a couple of points here. One, we're leading with the goal of funding this project without use of local taxpayer resources. So that is one of the primary goals, is that we not use local property tax or other local taxpayer, local resident resources. Really focusing our efforts looking at tourism related because this tourism related revenue, because this facility, and as all of the facilities on the Lane Event Center receive, the Lane Event Center is funded both through tourism related fees as well as fees from operations of the services that are provided there. So we've focused our efforts really looking at what those revenues are that are generated from tourism related activities. I've already noted the $17.5 million in upfront funding that we've identified, $10 million commitment from the team, $7.5 million from the state. We do believe that we can go back to the state legislature and request additional state funding for the project. So that is not identified. That is not an assumption in terms of funding that we have available, but we do know that that's an opportunity. We've also identified approximately $600,000 in annual existing revenue from the Lane Event Center that is TRT funding. It's current TRT funding that's collected by the Lane Event Center that has been used to pay off debt on existing facilities, and that funding has now been made available because the debt has been paid off. So that is a diversion. That is a diversion of existing TRT resources from the Lane Event Center. So sort of think about, opportunity costs there. If we're going to dedicate those funds for this project, it's less existing resources that the Lane Event Center would have available to it for other facilities and other operations. But we do feel like this is a facility that's going to add to the vitality and vibrancy of that campus. So I just wanted to make those couple of points. There are a number of other things we can talk about in terms of additional funding that we can pursue, but there's a sizable gap. And so what the board asked us to do again in May was to look at what are the opportunities to generate new revenue, what are the options that the board has available to us to close that sizable gap. And so I'll ask Christine to walk through what we've identified.
Thank you, Steve, Chair Farr, and commissioners. So as mentioned, I'll just start by saying I'm going to tell you assumptions using the high number for the project. You've seen the $60 to $80 million range. You've got information on both of those. There's a chart on page 7 of your memo that shows both of those, but I'll just focus on the 80 rather than confusing and going back and forth. So again, assuming the one-time money that we have received and have identified and the $600,000 in existing TRT that was just mentioned, the remaining gap at $80 million is about $4.8 million annually. This is assuming a 20-year bond at 6% interest. That's what our financial advisors are recommending we use as an interest rate right now. It is conservative, but we'll know more as we get closer to a date when we would actually issue. So looking to see what Lane County has available, what the board has available to them as far as existing tax rates that you have in your Lane code that could be changed. The first one being transient room tax and the second one being car rental tax. So related to transient room tax, earlier this year, Travel Lane County developed some comparative rate information for other like tourism markets. You have that information in your packet. It does indicate that our TRT rate is lower than the majority of those. So we do believe there is room to increase the rate up to 2%. A 1 percentage point of TRT increase countywide would generate an estimated 1.8 million. That's based on last year's receipts. Obviously that tax grows over time. And last year we do know we had large events, the World Games, but we do feel that that's a good number to use going forward, 1.8. So it can be, that tax can be increased by the board through a lane code amendment. So you would have public hearing and a couple readings, just as you do with any other ordinance in order to make that happen. On the car rental tax side, the county has a car rental tax. The current rate is 10%. It is used in the general fund is where the code directs it, although a little bit of it is transferred to parks and has been for decades. So they do receive a little bit of that. A 1% increase in car rental tax would generate about $325,000 annually. And then same process, it would be an ordinance change with a public hearing and a couple readings at a minimum. So as mentioned, there's other funding options available. So anything, as I think is fairly obvious to you. The more that we receive in the upfront, if we identify other funding sources, it will change that 4.8 number. And then, of course, the project funding. So all working together as a puzzle, but that's what we have for you at this time. And then again, just pointing you to the chart on page 7 of your memo that does show the 80 million, kind of does the math for you. If you were to increase car rental tax and transient room tax by 1 point, or if you were to increase both of them by 2 points, what the balance needed would be. As you'll see, there is still some additional need there, but again, looking to those other funding sources as well, including going back to the state.
I just want to make one point before we turn to Corey and ask Corey to give you a little bit of an update on the Lane Event Center operations and how the fair went, just very briefly, get a sense of this campus and how it's functioning today and what a facility like this could mean for the campus. I just want to make a point about the way that you heard Sean talk about this. We've done an RFQ for design build, and the way that we're pursuing this project is to identify the funding we have available for the project first, and then work with a design build firm to design and construct that facility based on the budget we have available, right? As opposed to going and saying, we want to build this facility, here are the specifications, tell us how much you can do that for. Our intent here is to say, here's the budget we have available, and work with that design build firm then to design the facility based on that budget. So I just want to make that point clear, because certainly as commissioners, you're sitting here going, okay, we have a range of estimates. How do we decide between, what size of a project we want to pursue? Some of those questions will be dependent on policy decisions you make around, as Sean talked about, the emergency capabilities of the facility, right? Those will add some cost. They'll add value certainly to the community. They will also add cost to the project. So, at some point we'll get to that place where we'll really need to know. And I think that's where there will be a convergence between the board's policy direction around what type of facility amenities, particularly for the broader community around emergency preparedness, do you want to pursue. That then helps inform some of your decision around how much funding we need to make available for the project cost. So, Corey, could you just give us an update on Lane Event Center, the fair this year, and how things are going, particularly as it relates to the master plan and sort of the future vision for the campus?
Sure. Thank you, Chair and Commissioners. As an enterprise fund, it's not very often that we get to talk about major renovations or capital projects. So I'm extremely thrilled that we're having these conversations, no matter where we end up going. It's an opportunity that I'm glad I'm a part of. So we did just complete our annual county fair, had another very successful fair with over 110,000 people attending over 5 days. We have made a lot of food vendors and local vendors happy with the money that they have taken in, as well as, provide those opportunities for people to get out, enjoy the outdoors, enjoy what we have, and be entertained. Throughout the year, particularly before COVID, we would see anywhere from 650 to 750,000 people a year coming through those facilities. That's, not just the convention center, but that's the sports center, the ice arena, and everything that we have going on out there. We are in the convention center near capacity during the winter months. We're often turning away large conventions and businesses just because we do not have that capacity. And that, is something that we're definitely looking forward to working through in that master plan and this format as well, and identifying those opportunities for, new facilities and renovations to better accommodate, what we can do within the community. In terms of community outreach, we have a very good relationship with our neighborhood association and the public. We've been talking to them, off and on now for over a year. We have a dedicated email and phone line set up where we're taking information in and their concerns. We've sent some informational postcards out to the neighbors. Right now we're in that outreach kind of portion where we're letting them know what we're doing. There's going to be plenty of opportunities to get them involved and to get feedback regarding some of those concerns. I know you guys hear some of those concerns in your public comment, and you'll continue to hear those, and that's okay. We get calls every week. I took a half an hour call earlier this week from a neighbor who was concerned about certain things. And so we appreciate, the community's involvement and the fact that they're wanting to tell us what they want, and they're wanting to tell us what's of importance to them. And we look forward to kind of tying all of this together with the master plan, who are kind of watching and waiting as we make this decision on this first piece, knowing that this is going to kind of contribute to the rest of the master plan as we move forward.
Thank you. So, and I'll just make it, appreciate Corey talking about community outreach. There has been a lot of work that we put into community outreach, but we also recognize that that is going to be is this project, if and when this project continues to evolve, the amount of community outreach will continue to expand. So we've done a lot of intentional work, as Corey mentioned, meeting with neighbors, doing outreach, websites, information, flyers, and that work will only continue as we continue to pursue this effort. Obviously, the neighbors and the residents directly in that area will need to be a significant part of the design process if and when we pursue that. So community outreach is a significant focus and will continue to be. And then I think before sort of wrap up and turn it back to you, Chair, for questions and direction, I want to just touch the report in front of you and the presentation we provided you is not discussed an indoor facility. And that's because when the board directed us in May, you directed us to really focus on looking at this issue. There's obviously been a lot of feedback around that. And I will note that when this project that we're currently discussing related to a multi-use community facility with the M's as an anchor tenant came to us, it was the M's that came to us, right? As well as other community and business interests that were concerned about the potential of the team leaving and the opportunity that existed potentially a year ago was thought at using this large campus we have and sort of this return to Civic Stadium. So that opportunity was presented to us, and we felt like it was important for us to keep the door open to that and pursue the due diligence and understand whether or not the project was viable. So I sort of, several of you have talked about the approach we have in Lane County, which is we talk about focused on solutions, one of our 3 core behaviors. We try to keep doors open, not close them. We try to sort of put one foot in front of the other. Commissioner Trieger talked about that. Like we're trying to do the next best or right thing and get those questions answers and then move forward sort of steadily in that process. That's how we pursued this effort, is with the public trust first in mind, by doing our due diligence and making sure that if we're going to take on a project that has significant construction costs and operational costs and opportunity, that we also are making sure that it's in the best interest of the broader community and the broader public and the taxpayers in the community. So we are, I think, at this stage of this project, because we have steadily gone through that due diligence. And I would say the extent to which the board would like to keep the door open to additional facility investments and the visions that have been discussed related to an indoor track and under other indoor facilities, and direct us to do additional work on that, we are certainly open to pursuing similar sort of due diligence and one foot in front of the other steps to evaluate that work, because we do feel like keeping doors open is part of what we are in the business of doing, is being responsive to the interests of the community and trying to pursue things that are in the broader good of the community. So I'll wrap there and just say, what we're asking, there was a lot of information for you, but the bottom line is we are asking for direction from you today. You do have a draft board order. We're asking you to fill in the blanks there. We're here for any questions you may have on the details, but really need to answer that question today. And I will say this is not your final decision. So if you do direct us to come back with an ordinance to pursue some additional new revenue, there will need to be 2 readings, a first reading and then a second reading and public hearing, where there will be a lot of public comment on just that revenue question. And then the board would need to consider adoption of that ordinance. And then after that, there's additional design work that needs to happen. As Sean talked about, additional due diligence with the team around agreements on how we will operate, additional financing. The board ultimately sort of go time becomes when the board approves a financing plan about here's all the money we have from these different sources to fund construction of the project, and the board votes on that. So none of that is happening today. We need some really critical direction from you today, but I also want to be clear, this isn't like go or no go, the final go or no go for the project, but it is an important step. So hopefully that's clear, and I'll turn it over to you, Chair, to answer questions.
Thank you, Ms. Mograce, and thanks to the panel also. I'm going to speak very briefly first. I typically don't do that, but before I do that, and the reason is we have a presence here of Travel Lane County. They've stepped forward with the suggestions regarding other uses of the fairgrounds, notably the indoor multi-use facility. We're all interested in that. Ms. Mograce, Mr. Bulley, you and I all sit on the board of Travel Lane County, so we hear very closely and very upfront what their concerns are, what their desires are. And what I hear from them over and over again, and we heard it today in public testimony, we've seen it in written testimony, that they are in favor, generally speaking, of this use of the facility, of the fairgrounds facility for a multi-use outdoor stadium. They also would like us to move forward with considering for future consideration, how could we potentially accommodate an indoor stadium? And what I'm hearing from you, Mr. Mograce, is that is on our list of consideration for the future, that the full use of the fairground, including a potential indoor facility, is one of the next, in the line of next steps for the future use of the fairgrounds. Is that a fair assessment? Can I say that, can I look the executive director in the eye and say that is a part of our consideration for the future?
I would say yes, pending the board's direction. So I think it is important for us to hear from you. We would like to further evaluate this specific potential, because I think there was a specific request. There has been discussion about what about an indoor facility that could serve as an indoor track, that could have other indoor events. And I'd say three very basic primary questions. They're not simple questions to answer, but they're foundational questions. Three questions that we needed to answer as it relates to the multi-use stadium with the M's as an anchor tenant, that we also would need to answer for this facility, for an indoor facility to be viable. One, can it be sited in this location, right? So if the proposal is Lane Event Center, we first have to determine where would the facility go? How would it be sort of orientated with the rest of the facility? So the siting is the question number one. Question number two to answer is, how do we pay for the construction of that facility? That's one of the questions we're trying to resolve today as it relates to the stadium project. With an indoor facility, we need to ask similar questions about, would there be additional TRT available if the board or car rental tax or other funds available? Could we pursue state funding? How would you make the construction of the project viable? That's two. Three is, who's going to operate the facility, right? How is it? What's the operational plan? How is that operation, the cost of the operations viable? And of course, with the multi-use stadium, that question is largely answered because we have the M's that's been a near 70-year operator in the community that has expanded season with more games. It's going to, is a proven operator of facilities like this. So those are the three questions we need to answer. My answer to your question is yes, that we absolutely we want that direction from you, that if you want us to pursue that due diligence, we can do that. And that's how we would approach that due diligence, is by beginning to look at answering those three questions in more detail.
Thank you, Ms. Mograce. You've described due diligence very adequately right there. And I believe that that covers my questions regarding that. I think today we're here to discuss potential funding for the outdoor multi-use facility. At this point, we've already talked about indoor facilities, the future. Commissioner Burney and I have been on the ground floor of discussion regarding an indoor facility for quite some time now, for 10, 20 years, is that? Actually, I first thought about it when I heard the Millrose Games track was coming here about 10 years ago, where it's in somebody's garage someplace right now, I think. But anyway, with that, Ms. Mograce, I'm going to turn it over to the board for discussions regarding specifically the potential funding and direction ahead for the multi-use outdoor facility. And I'll begin with Commissioner Burney.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I think 25 years now. I fully support this order moving forward. I do have a couple of questions, and thank you, Chair Farr. A couple of sets of lines of them. The first one is, if this body directed that you come back with an ordinance that related to TRT, who knows how it's going to go, and that ordinance identified for outdoor and indoor facilities, would that accommodate the discussion we've had thus far, keeping that option open?
Yeah, I think, you know, based on the board's feedback, really how we started by talking about Lane Event Center as the community's gathering place. And what I've consistently heard from the board in these meetings that you've had over the course of the last year is a desire to invest, the need for investment in the Lane Event Center, and the desire to invest resources in the facility. So there are a lot of needs there, and those, they include multi-use, various multi-use facility options. And so I think we would craft language that would be, that would reflect the investment in, the desired investment of the board in the Lane Event Center for new and other investments in multi-use facilities.
Chair, I want you to know that when I had the honor of being chair, I would have many conversations with Mr. Mokrahysky, and I always would interrupt him. And I didn't interrupt, but I'm gonna, is that a yes?
Yes. Yeah, I think that's a yes.
Thank you very much. No, I didn't mean that demean. I just, okay, just clarification. So that would cover that as an option. I've heard discussion within the last year of this potential facility costing 40 million, 55 million, 70 million, et cetera. Are you, you being anyone here, that reasonably certain that 80 is the top figure at this point in time, not knowing when construction would begin and with all the other variables, or is it just a best guess right now?
Let me take a stab initially at that, and then Sean, you can add to this. I will just say, when there were very early numbers, maybe a year ago, that were thrown out, it was a reflection, I believe, of looking back at years in the most recent project in the state that was done, I believe, was in Hillsborough, a minor league baseball stadium that was done in Hillsborough. And so we looked at that as those sort of preliminary. Obviously, that happened a period of time ago and was is a slightly different facility, we feel. And we actually just met with our consultants yesterday, and they feel very confident. And there have been the estimate that was provided to you of the $60–80 million range assumes construction beginning in 2023. So there is some growth in costs that are assumed within that assumption. And just as of yesterday, consultants feel confident that we can build a project, that we can do a project within that range. The real question, as we said, is around what that,
absolutely
proof of concept, where we just don't know until we go to the market. And then I will again say, we're going to pursue the project with the resources we have available, right? So that's what we will do. If we have a budget for X amount, that's what we're going to do the project for.
Got it. Thank you. Mr. Mokrahysky, you're taking all my time. I'm being facetious.
Time's up, Commissioner.
I know.
Sean, do you want to add anything to that?
Here's I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, Chair and Commissioners, I think also the real question is that all of the estimates that we've received to date, and yes, 40 to 80 million large swing, none of those include immediate occupancy. So I think that is going to be a decision that the board will need to make in the future. So we have this cost estimate. This is what a multi-use facility would cost. Is it a portion of that multi-use facility we build to immediate occupancy? Is it the whole thing? Is it none at all? So I think that's going to be your primary driver in our cost estimates.
So, Chair, rather than keep asking questions, I'll just make a statement and zip it. One of the things that I'll be looking at as we move forward, because again, I thoroughly support this, is looking at if it's TRT, what the TRT increase would yield, projections over time as to the increases in revenue that the TRT will receive based upon what's happening. Whether those increases are only enough to cover a 20-year bond, or whether they're actually based on numbers you're going to get, or whether there's actually a delta there. And so that delta in a relatively short period of time could also allow for other investments as opposed to waiting 20 years, right, before there's anything else on the table. Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much. I know those are impossible questions to answer.
Thank you, Commissioner Burney. Commissioner Bozovich.
Thank you. You know, the Lane Event Center is a community gathering place, and you know, our administrator sort of touched on it, but one of the major functions that it's served over the last several years has been where we gather in emergencies. And I'm hoping that staff will pursue FEMA and whatever dollars we can to fund some of the facilities that could be considered emergency response facilities, the kitchen facilities, the locker rooms, maybe working with EWEB for an emergency well to be placed on the fairgrounds, various other aspects, because subduction zone earthquake's coming. It's not whether, you know, it will arrive sometime and we'll have to respond to that. Wildfires are always going to be here. Floods have always been an issue in the Willamette Valley. We're going to need that emergency response. And if it wasn't but for the Lane Event Center, where would the livestock and pets have gone during the Holiday Farm fire? Where would we have held those mass vaccination clinics? You know, just the ability of having that gathering place has been so critical. And this facility can add to that capability in so many ways. So I'm hoping as we look at this, we go after as much one-time money as possible, which includes federal dollars. And that will free up money for other projects. And with that, I know that Alex and our folks that are going to be up in Salem are going to be lobbying heavily for increasing that $7.5 million. I know our original ask was for 15 and we only got 7.5. But you know, like with other projects, we get a commitment for a certain amount from legislature, and then we come back and get them to up that amount. So every $1 million we can get up front is going to lower that 20-year financing cost and free up whatever TRT and car rental tax we choose to increase for other uses at the fairgrounds or other uses in the community relative to indoor facilities. So I don't think we need to actually amend the actual board order, because the way it's worded is multi-use community facility and it kind of covers that. And I would encourage, you know, that we prepare for the higher of the scenarios, the 2% increases in those taxes, so that we have the max flexibility as we try to get, as a board and a community and staff, try to get more one-time money, upfront monies for this, so that we can have that money left over, because there are some really aging buildings on that site that need to be replaced. And if they were replaced with an indoor sports facility, they still would function as that flat area space they currently function now, which is basically all they're good for. And some of it's not even air conditioned. So it's like, it's under roof, it has a concrete floor, but that's about it. You know, so you know, unless it's livestock or you know, certain displays, it's not real useful space. Maybe a little bit of roller rink stuff or roller derby, you know, here and there. But yeah, so you know, we really have a community gem in having that 40 acres in the center of our county seat. And to have that there for that emergency response, have it there for that community gathering place where we can supply family-oriented, affordable entertainment for people to get together and be in community after such separation that the pandemic caused. I'm really enthused about this and looking at moving forward. And I just think all along the event center has been something that's been in the background of my mind, is something that we've underinvested in, and I've always wished we could invest more. And this is providing that kind of catalyst to do so. You know, I remember when we went through the controversy of tearing down the extension building and the community, you know, that kind of went crazy over that for a little bit, and how much that increased our flexibility in running the fair and other events when we did that. So we just have to keep looking at this as something we're going to have to continue to look at, updating master plans or changes in the community and what's going on, you know, culturally in the area. But we've just got such a great opportunity that I'm looking forward to you know, approving a motion to keep this moving forward, knowing that we're going to have a public hearing, knowing that we haven't made final decisions, we haven't gotten contracts, we haven't looked at the options relative to immediate occupancy, you know, bells and whistles. I'm particularly going to be interested in bells and whistles when it comes to soundproofing and light pollution and a few other issues that the community is concerned about. But yeah, that's really, yeah, I appreciate staff and all the work they've done. I appreciate our partnership with the M's so far. And I appreciate Travel Lane County's input and the desire to try and keep this community moving forward as an epicenter for sports, you know, in so many ways. You know, we've just got a great community that's, you know, we're track town, we're world-class cycling around this area. And now we're going to, you know, we've got our own minor league baseball team. Communities our size don't always get to brag about that. So I'm just really excited and looking forward to saying yes to a motion.
Thank you, Commissioner Bozvich, and thank you for pointing out that it's more than just a community gathering. It's a regional service center that we're looking at. And some of those buildings, I was doing home shows in the animal barns for Jerry's 47 years ago, and they were old then. Commissioner Buck.
So were you.
Thank you, Chair. I fully concur with my fellow commissioner and all the comments that he just made. I have a few questions and then probably comment myself. We've done a market analysis on the TRT, knowing that we have room for about 2%. Did we do that for the car rental tax? Because I didn't see that in the paperwork. So I don't, there is a potential of increasing that, but I don't know where we are in the current market. And if we have that, you know, space to raise that particular tax.
Commissioner Buck, Chair Farr. So we don't have a current market estimate. I can go out there and look at it. This is not a common tax. So it's not near as common as transient room tax. So many of our comparable counties and cities do not have it. So that's been the struggle in the past, whether they had passed one. But we could go out and look to find what we can find about who has it and what their rates are.
I'd look forward to that information in a future meeting, just so I get a sense of what can the market bear and in that particular line item. I know it's a much smaller line item, so it's not the bulk of the resources that we're looking for, but it is an important piece of information. In the order itself, I noticed it doesn't necessarily state a particular TRT percentage. Do we need to make that particular decision today and insert it in this ordinance?
Yes. So we'd ask that we sort of have a fill in the blank. You know, our recommendation is depending on the we have our recommendation here depending on which project budget you want to pursue. I want to also just note that there was a slight adjustment in that. So this is to Commissioner Burney and Commissioner Farr's comments about whether or not there's reasonable flexibility in the order itself. And the language in the order is so we'd ask you to specify the amount so that when we bring back the ordinance, that we can draft the ordinance as such. But we have language here that says, in order to enhance tourism related facilities of Lane County at the Lane Event Center. So it would be, it provides that the language is here, and we would have the ordinance language similarly have that flexibility in it to allow us to make the investments at the campus that are consistent with what the board would like to do, but understanding there are multiple investments that are possibilities. To answer your question specifically, yes, we'd like you to be clear about the amount to include in the ordinance.
Thank you. That leads me to my next question, which is on page 7, where you have the financials in broad sense laid out. There is a possibility, as you mentioned, to be able to go after additional funding. And let's say we get lucky and we're able to get another 5 million or whatnot from the state of Oregon. Who knows? I mean, I know that we'll probably go out and ask for something, but I don't know the dollar amount. But for example, we get another 5 million somehow. Clearly, that's more than what we would need to pay for the largest estimate that we have forward in the 80,000 scenario, because it says estimated remaining at the highest level, 2,775,000.
That's annually over 20 years.
Got it.
Just be clear about that.
Got it.
But what?
Thank you, because that's not specified in the actual document. So you need 7.75 annually over 20 years additional in order to make this happen.
Right. And the way that we broke it out that way is because the revenue we're talking about is it's ongoing. And so there is a financing cost to that. So to give you one number today, right, if we had all of it, they're just different numbers to work with. I think where you're going, Commissioner, is say if we did receive additional funds and we are going to actively pursue, we have a congressionally directed spending request, particularly for immediate occupancy facilities, that any dollars that we receive, any state dollars or additional funding that we receive to go towards this project, particularly that's up front, it will significantly lower the total project. Well, I shouldn't say it will lower it by the amount that it is, and it would lower that annual cost by a corresponding amount.
That is where I'm headed, because if we get some additional funding to bring it down to a point where we, if we're lucky, have extra money, what would we do with it? Knowing that it is under this umbrella of a general multi-purpose facility, regardless of its outdoor or indoor, and being able to have a possibility of utilizing that for another facility in the center itself. So what I'm trying to get at is, if we have this broad language in the use of this TRT money, I'd like us to come back and talk about how we can utilize that for another potential facility on the site. It sounds like we have broad support in maybe a later motion or session motion in the day today to talk about direction on a possible indoor multi-purpose facility. But we have to talk about what we would utilize that existing TRT money for that we're talking about today in the increase. I would love to be able to utilize, if we don't use it all, for another facility in that in the whole fairgrounds area. Sorry, losing words there, but I think you get the gist.
You nailed it, Commissioner.
I think you get the gist.
Yeah, if I can respond, I think so. The way with if you direct us via this ordinance that has this language in it that is clear that an increase in revenue would be dedicated for enhancing tourism related facilities of Lane County at the Lane Event Center, that's what any funds would be restricted to doing. Right. And what it does is it maintains reasonable flexibility for the board to be able to use any of those resources for investment in facilities like a multi-use stadium or like an indoor track or other facilities at the Lane Event Center. So the ordinance language that it would be general in the sense it would be specific to where the funds could be used and for what general purposes, but it would leave some flexibility there. So I think the answer to your question is yes, that if we're able to identify other funds for the stadium project and limit the need for all of the, say, increased TRT to be spent on this one project, it would make other facility investments more viable.
And I need to move us along a little bit. We have further business before our midday break beyond this, but I don't want to cut this off at all. But the ordinance is yet to be written and yet to be deliberated. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Farr. Just one small comment on that. I do think it's important to highlight, and we did mention in the memo, that there is a state statute that designates how you can spend transient room tax, how you can spend increases in transient room tax. So a lot of this will be answered when we come back to you with the code language, but we will make sure we follow statute, and then however the code can be written in order to direct to all of these tourism related facilities.
And there will be plenty of opportunity for board input between now and the actual drafting of the ordinance and the wording of the ordinance. With that, Commissioner Buck, does that conclude your lines of questions?
Yes.
And we have Vice Chair Trieger. I have a couple of words to say, and we'll try to move along to the further business. Some of us need to get home for the afternoon executive session. So Commissioner Trieger, followed by Commissioner Burney.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation. I also, before I forget, for anyone watching from the public, want to remind folks that we have on our website a page dedicated to the changes coming to the Lane Event Center, both writ large in terms of our long-range planning efforts and specifically this project that we're discussing, and because I've been directing people there, and often the majority of the questions they have at this stage are answered on that site. So also appreciate staff for putting that website together, those frequently asked questions. And particularly it includes our commitment to not increasing property taxes and to not sacrificing other critical community priorities, that this project is not in competition with the ongoing work of the county and service to the community. So just that reminder, because that connects to the nature of community outreach, and that folks know that community outreach doesn't mean do enough people. It's not an informal vote. It's engagement and input and context and what are the things you're concerned about. So we're sure we're addressing those things. So I just want to let folks know that too, when they weigh into us, to give us the more substantive input you can give us about what your concerns are, the more we can help ensure they're addressed as we move forward, rather than just I like it, I don't like it. So that's just my request out to the community. Specific to this item and the order before us, I really appreciate that it says that we're saying you will prepare one or more ordinances for increasing tourism-related tax rates in order to enhance the tourism-related facilities, plural, of Lane County, not of the event center necessarily. As I mentioned earlier in remonstrance, I am very interested in us using this tool to expand opportunity and not lock us in or lock the proponents of an indoor track facility into a location sooner than we have to. At our previous meeting, we asked staff to bring information back to us about the Glenwood transfer site, for example. There's still, as Mr. Mokrzycki mentioned, siting issues as well as dollars and operator issues. So I don't want to lock us in prematurely to a site. Also, because the long-range planning process that we're undergoing for the fairgrounds is already a little held up, it's a little chicken and eggy already. And so the more we continue to do that and lock in too much of the campus, presupposing what the broader highest and best value use of that campus is, I would rather we not do that. So as much flexibility as we can retain in the language at this stage, the better. I have a specific question about the transient lodging tax. At what point do we need what degree of specificity about how it will be spent? In other words, right now, this is very broad, tourism-related facilities in Lane County. So, specifically connect those revenues to a project at a site. And then what happens with any taxes, transient lodging taxes that are collected ultimately that may be in excess of their use? Can we write it in such a way that we front load the revenue collected to one project for the first number of years and so on? Like how nimble can we be with this tool?
So I appreciate you asking that question, because in Christine's prior response, it reminded me of a point that I think we really need to hammer home here. And that is that think about the ordinance. So if you're you're potentially directing us to draft an ordinance. The ordinance is not where the dollars get specifically allocated for a specific use. The ordinance is authorizing the collection of the resources and you're putting it in a box. You're saying, under state law and some reasonable specificity around tourism related facilities. But we collect all kinds of resources. We collect TRT that are dedicated we put it towards the parks, we put it towards Lane Event Center, or it funds Travel Lane County. The ordinance authorizes the collection of the resources. The board makes decisions all the time then on specific projects. If we're going to pursue a new project at Lane Event Center, that will come before you and you'll take a separate action on that. So don't think about the ordinance. That's the sort of overarching authorization of collecting the resources. And then you're going to have all these other, as I mentioned, we're still going to have to come back if this project advances to say, here's how we finance the total project. Here's what the cost is. Here's where the revenue is coming from. And we're proposing to take X amount from this new revenue you dedicated over 20 years, and it's going to go towards here. And at that point, we'll be able to answer, there's excess. We had to use all of it for this, or there's additional funding available. And so as we pursue other projects, other facility investments, that can be considered.
Great. That is very helpful. Thank you. I see Christine wants to say something, and then I have
just briefly that the code language itself will have some specificity. That's how your code is written now, but in all sections of your transient room tax code, which we will bring the entire thing to you, I think it would be good for you to see it again, is there's the ability of the board to change things through the annual budget process as long as it meets state law. So that flexibility has always existed, and some of those decisions have been made. So it does make it a little bit funding projects that come up, but we're making sure that they're allowable uses at every junction.
Great, thank you. So the order before us today we're looking at is to prepare ordinance to do that increase, and we'll discuss later what we want to spend it on, as well as the specific dollar amount for the due diligence that we can expend currently collected. That is all great. I'm fully in support. And then it sounds like it would be useful to our administrator to separately have a board assignment asking to start to work on some exploratory and feasibility conversations and outreach with partners, including Travel Lane County and others, around additional amenities and facilities, and that we keep the issues connected but separate because they're on very different timelines and so on, right? The final comment I would make is Commissioner Bozovich mentioned the emergency use and the resource that the Lane Event Center has historically been, continues to be, and will be into the future. We already have the well project with eWeb. They've tapped into that. We had the little launch. They're doing their next one out at Sheldon soon. They've got their whole system-wide plan going. So that's in place. And I do not want to lose the immediate occupancy standard checkbox from this project. I think that is critically important. We've been talking about it from the get-go. We're talking about with community. It's how we've secured a great deal of the support that we've had so far. And I think we will get more from our state legislators and from our federal delegation. And I just think it's too important for us to be sort of penny wise and pound foolish and not be forward thinking as we typically are, and make sure we keep that immediate occupancy on the table.
Thank you. And while that clock on the wall is still 3 minutes fast, we are approaching the midday break. Commissioner Burney.
Thank you. As someone who's pound wise and penny foolish, Commissioner Trieger, I want to thank you. Two of the things you said were uppermost on my mind. Those were Lane County has other sites. So I just, for what it's worth, want to say I'm going to be supporting a 2% increase. And I'm going to be suggesting language that says Lane Event Center and other county properties for maximum flexibility. There might be other sites that might be useful. So that's what I support in this as direction moving forward. I would like to quickly, Chair, comment that as Commissioner Bozovich mentioned, emergency capabilities. If you would, whether you do or not is not up to me, I encourage you to look at a project that my company developed called the Net Zero Plus Training Center in Commerce, California, At the time, it was the largest project that produced more clean energy than it used, and it created one of the primary evacuation centers for County of Los Angeles officials during the event of an emergency. There are going to be emergencies, as Commissioner Bozovich mentions, that there are going to be climate events, some of which he mentioned, some of which he didn't, that are increasing at just ever escalating paces. So to the degree that this becomes a net zero plus emergency facility, I think we will find dollars in the Inflation Reduction Act. I think we have the opportunity for earmarks. I think, and I know you're on top of it, et cetera, et cetera. So as Commissioner Buck was saying, I feel lucky. And I feel like with this staff, we're going to get a lot of dollars to chip away. So my question is, if that's the case, it comes kind of important when we go out for a bond to cover gaps, not to go out for the maximum the county can get, because we're always going to be getting dollars to chip away at various projects that would come under this general ordinance, but to look at how we can't maximize flexibility, minimize encumbering the county to the point where it doesn't have that flexibility, as you were saying, Commissioner, for other projects at other sites. Thank you. But those are for right now, Chair, 2%, Lane Event Center and other county facilities.
Then with that, I will look for a motion. And I think you've heard, I'm hoping that the motion does include the maximum percentage that we can ask for both on car and transient lodging tax. So how do we insert that, Mr. Mokryski?
In a motion.
Okay, then I'm going to look for the motion. I think that's easy to insert. So who's going to give me a motion? I can do it. Robert's rules allow me to make a motion. Commissioner Buck.
I'm going to give it a go here. So chime in if I need some assistance, please. Clearly, we have a order in front of us, and I'd move approval of order 2208-23-07 in the matter of reporting on a proposed Lane Events Center multipurpose facility and directing the county administrator on project funding options with a 2% TRT rate and a 2% CRT rate.
That's clear. Do I have a second?
Second.
Does that pass your requirements for a motion? Very good. Then we have a motion before us, which inserts 2% on both optional taxes for the county, optional fees for the county. Discussion to the motion. I see none. I think we're ready to vote then. I see no discussion from the panel either. So with that, I'm going to call for the vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Passes unanimously with the 2% on both tax rates. Thank you. And a lot more discussion to be had on this before any final decisions are made, but you have the authority at this point in time. Then let's move on down our agenda. Thank you everyone who attended today, and my telephone lines are open subsequent to this meeting.
Operators are now standing by.
Actually, a question: do we need to, Mr. Mokryski, do you need instructions regarding the further consideration of an optional facility, an additional indoor facility?
I think it would be good if you made it as an assignment so that we can track it as such, because I think that you're leaving the flexibility open for the use of resources, but then to be specific about the due diligence that needs to happen on that side.
Very good. Then you will receive that as an assignment when that agenda item comes up. So that's a telegraph message. Okay, let's move along with the agenda. We're looking at item 8C, which is an action, a letter to Director Bell of Oregon Housing Community Services regarding Lane County's comments to the draft planning, infrastructure, and economic revitalization, the PEER, I'll say from now on, guidelines for CDBG-RDR action plan allocations. And with that, I believe that Mr. Mokryski, as is my practice, please introduce your panel.
Thanks, Chair. We have Steve Adams, our policy director, and Matt McCray, what's your title now, Matt?
Disaster Recovery Manager.
Yeah, he's a jack of all trades.
Betsy. Thank you, Mr. Mikoski. Chair Farr, Commissioners, good morning. In the interest of time, I will just remind the board that some months ago, we submitted a commentary to Director Bell of the Oregon Housing and Community Services Agency, the recipient of $422 million in federal community development block grant disaster recovery funds for purposes of advancing really unmet needs within the Holiday Farm fire affected area. So this board submitted commentary during a public open period. We were the only board to do so, and it had specific impacts. As we talked to staff, we saw specific changes in the action plan that they submitted to HUD. That has been submitted, and they are waiting for HUD approval now. So the staff continues the development of this program. They have set aside 10% of the funds, so approximately $42 million for projects related to planning, economic revitalization and infrastructure across all of Oregon's fire affected communities from the Labor Day fires of 2020. So we had concerns obviously about this particular program. So this is 10% of the whole. And OHCS is in fact asking for commentary on a pretty short timeline. And we wanted to bring this forward to you before that timeline existed. We have specific concerns about the particular parameters that they're putting in place associated with this program that's only 10% of the whole. We don't yet know what the parameters are going to be for the other two major components of the program, which encompass 90% of the program. And specifically, we're very concerned about the administrative burden that these draft guidelines actually place on us here locally. You'll probably know just from your background that community development block grant funds enable a recipient to receive 5% of the total for administrative overhead. It is an administratively difficult federal program to administer. That is for sure. OHCS chose to retain all 5% of that for their own purposes and requested and received from the Oregon legislature hiring authority for over 36 staff. We had assumed that those staff would be essentially Oregonians, helping Oregonians navigate federal regulations. What we are increasingly seeing some evidence of is that some of these staff will in fact be kind of form checkers with an assumption that we'll assume the local administrative burden in order to feed a kind of review and approve process at the state level. This, I don't think, is in spirit with what we would want to see. So the staff have prepared a letter for Chair Farr's signature and prepared this package to raise this issue for your consideration. Before making ourselves available for specific questions, I do want to point out that under Commissioner Buck's leadership, there was a breakthrough late last week in conversations with the staff, particularly the staff in charge of the disaster recovery component. And I think it's incredibly important to recognize that we work well with OHCS on the other side, the traditional side of their funding. Director Bell joined many of you and many of us at events recently, including the opening of the NEL. So we really want to preserve housing being a critical issue for this county. We want to preserve the relationship, but we respectfully submit to this board and recommend that we intervene at this point with this written letter for the docket.
Right on. We have the letter before us, well written. I would add the word strenuously in a few places, but any questions or comments regarding this motion? Commissioner Buck, followed by, no? Commissioner Buck, thanks.
Thank you, Chair. I'll add that we've spent a considerable amount of time reviewing a 50+ page draft document on how to use these disaster recovery funds. This is 10%. We don't know how much the other programs will come out, how much percentage of the entire $422 million for fire affected counties will be. That is part of our issue that we're discussing in the letter. We don't have a global picture of exactly how this is going to be allocated and fairly among fire affected counties. And we continue to stress the unique nature of this being within an unincorporated location, and other fire affected communities have the benefit of having city agencies assist. we certainly do not. And we don't have the capacity internally as a county in order to fulfill the needs of their preliminary document on how to get the funds. We just don't have the staffing. So we are now able to set up fairly regular meetings with the director that's working on the disaster recovery funding. I think we've had some communication breakdowns, and this will really lead us into a better communication cycle with them so they can fully understand the unique needs that we have in comparison to some other locations. So I appreciate everybody considering this particular letter. It puts us on record each and every time funding comes out to ensure that the McKenzie River Corridor knows that we are paying attention to every single resource dollar that's coming in and fighting for our fair share every step of the way.
Thank you, Commissioner. Then I will look for a motion. Commissioner Buck.
I'll move approval of the letter to Director Bell of Oregon Housing and Community Services regarding Lane County comments to the draft planning, infrastructure, and economic revitalization, also known as PEER, guidelines for the Community Development Block Grant Disaster Recovery Federal Action Plan allocations of federal funds in response to the Labor Day fires of 2020.
Second.
Moved by Commissioner Buck, seconded by Commissioner Burney. Do we have discussion to the motion? Commissioner Bozovich.
I just want to say I fully support this. When I became a commissioner, one of the things we were doing was having to correct a failure to follow all the paperwork for a CBDG grant. And we almost lost our ability to even apply for those grants because of that. It is a heavy administrative burden to keep that paperwork up, and to have the state take the 5% administrative off the top for their own use, I think is something we definitely need to comment on, because we need to have that capacity locally to keep the paperwork necessary. Contractors, time cards, who they hired, who their subcontractors were, that stuff is hard to chase down after the fact, as we found out. This is an important issue, and I fully support it.
Thank you, Commissioner. Further discussion to the motion? I was going to make a comment on if all legislators had municipal experience. I won't make that comment. Then with no further discussion, I will call for the vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Passes unanimously. Then we'll move directly along to announcements. Mr. Mokrajewski.
Just one, I have our HR director, Alana Holmes, is here to give you a brief update on the county council recruitment process. We have hired a recruiter. The recruiter has been actively meeting with stakeholders. The position's been posted. I'm just kind of buying you time to sit down. Had some meetings with the chair and vice chair, and
Good afternoon. He's kind of covered half of it, so thank you, Steve. So the recruiter that we hired is Acumen. I believe all of you have had an opportunity to speak with them individually. They have been successful with other Lane County searches. Some of the more recent ones, our current H&HS director, the new equity manager, my position previously, the previous H&HS director. There are several others. So it's really great to have an opportunity to work with a firm who understands our organization and culture and has some established relationships. So as Steve said, they've also held a number of conversations with other stakeholders throughout the organization as they work to, figure out, as they look at applicants and really talk to them, what are the skill sets and competencies that we're looking for in the position. So as Steve said, the position is posted, the link is live. It's also on our website. So if anyone that's listening today has an interest in looking at it, you can go to our recruitment page and it's listed in the job posting section there. Per the board's direction, we recently met with the chair and the vice chair and Acumen to begin discussions about just various different aspects of the process moving forward. And then HR and a couple of other folks are trying to have standing meetings every week, just to keep things moving along. We're on I think, a pretty tight schedule here, and we want to keep to that as much as possible. And at this point, we're targeting the end of September for interviews if everything lines up just right, and we get candidates that we feel are of value to bring forward for consideration. So, and we'll also, I anticipate a session to discuss the process in more detail with the board, probably mid-September, or when you all come back after the recess, after the break. So that's my quick update. I know you all have other places to be if there are any questions. Thank you, Chair.
Questions for Ms. Holmes? Thanks for that quick. Commissioner Trigger and I have heard a little bit more due to our meeting with you late last week, but we're in process. Things are moving forward as rapidly as we possibly can, and thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And if there are any questions, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to talk with you further.
We know where you are.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Holmes. Then we'll move along to Commissioner Business, and I'm going to let you know that executive session will be moved to this afternoon exclusively, as you probably would have guessed. Any announcements from, Mr. Mokryski, back to you. You finished with announcements? Yep. Commissioner's announcements. I am seeing none at this point in time. Any future board assignments? I believe we telegraphed one. Do you want to cover it, Commissioner Buck?
Thank you, Chair. This is regarding our discussion about an indoor multipurpose facility at the Lane County Fairgrounds. I would like to receive head nods of interest with other commissioners for the county to review the three things that we did originally with the stadium analysis, which is determine if it can physically be sited on county property, regardless of which county property. I want to keep it broad. Can we fund the construction of the facility, or what would be the avenues to construct such a facility? And who would be the operator of said facility once it is constructed?
Thank you, Commissioner Buck. And Ms. Mokryski, that covers your 3 points of due diligence that you mentioned during your brief earlier. Very good. Head nods, unanimously head nodded. So thank you. Then we'll move along. I'm going to ask if there's any other business. Oh, Commissioner Bozievich, future board assignment requests.
Yeah, thank you. I've got two. The first, I've been in contact with ODOT about an issue on 101 that my constituents brought to my attention. And in the process of that, found out that Franny Brindle has retired. And we have a new ODOT area manager, Vidal Francis, and they'd like to come in and introduce themselves to the board as a separate agenda item, not in public comment with a 3-minute limit, and maybe a little brief conversation about ODOT, the area, and any projects going on. So my request is to get head nods to have the agenda team maybe work with ODOT on having that come up sometime in the near future.
That's clear. How's that go?
Is there any time sensitivity particular to that? I mean, I understand sooner's better, but is there any particular decision coming before them or us that?
Not really.
Okay, great. Thank you.
We're working towards the end of the NEPA process on the 126 improvements between Eugene and Bonita, but that's not really, that doesn't impact having to come in and introduce their new area manager.
He's been about a week on the job, so he's relatively new.
Time.
Yeah.
Being hosed down right now with a fire hose. Excellent. Then it looks like you have unanimous head nods on that, Commissioner. Second.
My second item, we've talked about this before and kind of pushed it off to Planning Commission, which really doesn't have a role in doing this. But I have gotten multiple contacts since that agenda item from people that own F2 property. Most recently, a 91-year-old that was depending on a sale of a piece of F2 property that's 19 acres that no longer has value. And when that sale was going to pay for the final long-term care and all that for that individual. It's a tragic story. I would like the board to provide head nods from the board to direct staff to bring an item back to us about amending the our rural comprehensive plan relative to big game habitat, and looking at changing definitions enough to make it about range and not individual lots, so we can allow some of these folks that purchased property. This one was 40 years ago, went through a partition actually and sold off two of the pieces, and this is the remainder piece that they had held on for investment in their retirement, and now it's basically worthless. And that's just one of many stories I've heard since we had brought this up. So I'm asking the board to reconsider having this come before the board versus pushing it off to planning commission that can't do really anything other than look at it.
You have my head nod on that. Look around. Comment from Commissioner Buck.
So the change in the rural comprehensive plan for big game has pretty decent implications, clearly for this particular person, but in a variety of settings. And I think the point of having the planning commission look at it was to be able to analyze all the various implications and come back to us and give us a report on what that all means. Because I think there's a lot going on there, and we all need some folks to really analyze the situation. And I'm not entirely sure what they have on their plate, but they generally meet periodically to work on whatever we as a board request them to look at. And if we need to move it to a higher priority for them to review, I am fine with that. But I'm not ready to move forward on that particular head nod for those reasons.
Question? Commissioner, is that process process already in place? Has this been referred to the planning commission? Yes. So are you, Commissioner Bozovich, are you trying to short circuit that to bring it here, or would you like us to?
Yes, I am, because there is really.
Did I finish?
Sorry, no, you asked the question. Sorry, I thought it was.
No, actually, I'm sorry, I'm almost done. Or would prioritizing it, as Commissioner Buck mentioned, help facilitate moving it forward faster? I'm done. I'm sorry.
So yeah, sorry for interrupting. I thought you were, when you asked the question, I thought you were done. Sorry. My apologies. No, my concern is the planning commission doesn't necessarily have the charge to look at, this sort of change in this way and make a recommendation to the board necessarily. I don't know if we provided enough direction when it was referred to them to do that. And we didn't necessarily provide staff with direction to do enough analysis to provide them with enough information to give us any sort of recommendations. That's my difficulty, is I think we're gonna wait for the planning commission to look at this and make an ill-informed recommendation back to the board because they're not being provided with enough information. I personally have a lot of detail on this. It's been something I've been heavily involved in. It does have implications in other ways, but it is something that was written back in the 80s. The intent was to be a density over a certain range, not by an individual lot. We have other places where we do determinations on approving changes based on, how many lots are under a certain acreage within a certain distance from a parcel, whether we'll let it be subdivided in RR. It's not about just that individual parcel. We talk about, what's the area look like? And I think it's going to take a while to even get through the process, because it will have to go to the planning commission no matter what. Once we actually start the process of amending the rural comprehensive plan, it's required to go through the planning commission. But an initial review by the planning commission is just delaying the initiation of that process in my mind. And that's what I'm getting at, is there are people right now suffering because of the NIMKIS decision. And by deferring it to planning commission, even if we prioritize it, it's still delaying the ultimate thing, which is this board has to provide direction to staff to actually hire somebody that has big game expertise, right findings if possible. They may come back to us and say, you know what, we can't support this. We've hired an expert. They agree with the NMCISH decision. I'm not presupposing that we'll end up amending the rural comprehensive plan. But, we have to initiate that process. Only the board can give that direction, initiate that process. The Planning Commission can't.
Thank you, Commissioners. Commissioner Vice Chair Trigger.
Thank you, Chair. I'm mindful of the time, but as the person who requested that we have our Planning Commission look at it and received head nods for that, nothing's really changed since then. And the purpose was never to try to defer the decision to them. It was because at the time we were getting a lot of information, some different stakeholders, and it was a way to utilize a resource that we have, which is community members who are engaged with content focus and guidance from staff to bring us some overview and recommendation, because it's dense material. And I appreciate and have a great deal of respect for your years of work on land use planning, but not all of us have that. And this is a way for some of us to get a little more grounded from a source that is guided by our staff, but of the community. So it's more information that will help us as commissioners make a better decision at the time that we do make the decision, which this was not an attempt to circumvent or delay. It was just using yet another resource that we have to make an even better, more informed decision. So I want to stick with the thing that we gave majority head nods to initially. And I'm happy to work with the agenda team. I don't know if Diana, if you know if that's already on the future assignments, has a date on our future items tracker already, if that would help to know that now if we do. But I'm happy to work with the agenda team to get it done sooner rather than later if that's an issue.
And I'm going to cut off discussion on this right now. I think the lines have been drawn. I'm in favor of Commissioner Bozovich's recommendation, in no small part because this board has a history of not regarding the Lane County Planning Commission's recommendations, no matter what the timing. So with that, do we have 3 head nods for Commissioner Bozovich's request? I see only 2.
Yeah, Chair.
Please.
I just want to give some good news, Planning Department. Okay.
Well, we're well into.
Right. I'll stop then.
Because if this is pertinent to this particular request, then go ahead. But I think the line's been drawn on this already. Okay. Then Ms. Booker, we'll move down. Is that it? Everything for future agenda requests? Then a review of assignments, Ms. Mokrowski.
So I heard 2 with head nods. The first from Commissioner Buck, that staff will pursue due diligence of the potential of an indoor multi-use facility regarding siting, funding, and operations. We don't have a time frame on that that it will require some time. So I will make that an assignment, and we can talk more about the timing involved there. And then Commissioner Bozovich's request to invite the new ODOT area manager to present to the board. So those are the 2.
Very good. Then before we move into my reading this into executive session for this afternoon, we do have reserved the option of coming out of executive session. I'll remind you, for other business, but likely we will not. So is there any other business that we need to consider at this point in time? That being said, I will read us into executive session. At the sound of my gavel, we will be recessed from regular board and convened in executive session. We'll meet at 1:30 p.m. Via remote. Then at this point, Ms. Mokrowski, I'm going to read us into executive session. The Board of County Commissioners will meet in executive session to conduct deliberations with persons designated by the governing body to carry on labor negotiations and to consult with counsel regarding the rights and duties of a public body with regard to current litigation. This executive session is held pursuant to ORS 192.6602 D and H, which allows the Board of Commissioners to meet in executive session for the purposes listed. Representatives of the news media and designated staff shall be allowed to attend the executive session. All other members of the audience are asked to leave the room. Representatives of the news media are specifically directed not to report on any of the deliberations during the executive session, except to state the general subject of the session as previously announced. No decision may be made in the executive session. We reserve the right to come back out in the public session should the need arise.